cold. That was the first thing he felt. Not pain, not fear, but cold, so deep that his bones ached like old pipes in January. Park Yeon-ho opened his eyes and saw a stone-vaulted ceiling. Torches on the walls burned with a reddish, flickering light. He was lying on a wooden cot in a cubbyhole the size of a storage closet. The hands were not his own, thin and sinewy, the hands of an 18-year-old boy. He curled his fingers and straightened them. They worked. He sat up and immediately hit his head on a low ledge. That familiar heaviness in his skull. Only last time, after a blow like that, he hadn't gotten back up. But now here he was, sitting, in a gray robe, in a body that wasn't his own, in a place that smelled of dampness and mold, and somewhere very close by, behind the wall, pipes were humming. Yeon-ho froze. He listened. The hum was low and steady. That's how a pressurized magic under pressure when there are no air pockets in the system. He knew that sound better than his own voice. 8 years underground in Seoul, wearing a yellow hard hat, had taught him to hear water through concrete and steel. And now, a different body. Stone walls, torches instead of lamps. But there are pipes. And if there are pipes, that means he's here too. The door to the small room swung open without a knock. Standing in the doorway was a boy of about 16 in a uniform embroidered with gold thread. His face was haughty, his lips were pursed. In his hand was a scroll, which he held with 2 fingers as if afraid of getting it dirty. The boy pointed the scroll toward Yeon-ho and said that the women's restroom in the second wing was clogged again. He said that this was now his job. He said that the dean hadn't yet decided whether to fire him or keep him on. He used a word that apparently served as a name here: scum. Yeon-ho looked up at him. Then he looked at the wooden box at his feet. Tools, not the ones his hands were used to in his past life. Instead of an adjustable wrench, something like a bronze tuning fork. Instead of pliers, a curved rod with serrations. But the shape was the same. Someone in this world had come up with the same solutions as the engineers of the 21st century, just made of different materials. He picked up the box, weighed it in his hand. About 4 kilograms. Not bad. Then he asked if they had a sewer map. The boy blinked, then blinked again. Apparently the scum here didn't ask questions. Yeon-ho repeated himself. A map. A plan. A diagram. Where everything flows to. The kid mumbled that there was no diagram and hadn't been one for the last 200 years. Yeon-ho nodded. He stood up. He slung the box over his shoulder and headed for the door. The boy flinched to the side as if Yeon-ho smelled bad. He probably did. Yeon-ho didn't pay any attention. He was already listening. The corridor was long and low, stone slabs underfoot, damp walls. A pipe ran behind the masonry on the left. He determined this by the sound, a slight vibration. The flow was going from top to bottom, so the source was somewhere above. That meant it was a gravity-fed system. That meant the elevation difference was doing the work of a pump. That simplified things. He walked and counted the turns, left, right, left again. A staircase leading up. 12 steps. Another hallway, but wider. Here the walls were made of white stone, and instead of torches, glowing crystals in copper holders illuminated them. Beautiful. Useless. Yeon-ho wasn't looking at the walls, but at the floor. Where the slabs met the foundation, he saw streaks, old, dried-up stains. So there had been water seepage here. So there was zero waterproofing. So they built it beautifully, but without a clue. He found the second wing by the smell. 8 years in Seoul's sewers had given him a nose that couldn't be fooled. Stagnant water, decaying organic matter, and something else. Something he hadn't encountered before. A slightly sweet tinge in the air, like ozone after a thunderstorm, but thicker. He stopped in front of a door with a peeling sign. It was quiet behind the door. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, 4 stalls, stone sinks along the wall. The floor was wet, A gurgling sound came from the farthest drain. Yanho set the box on the floor. He crouched down. He placed his palm on the stone floor next to the drain. It was cold, but not evenly. It was warmer on the left than on the right. So the flow was coming from the left. That meant the clog was somewhere to the right and lower down. He lay down on the floor. He pressed his ear against the stone. He closed his eyes. He listened. The water behind the wall told him everything he needed to know. Here was the main riser. It ran vertically. Here's the branch line to this room. The angle is wrong, too sharp, 45 degrees instead of the normal 30. That's where it's backing up, but further down, even further down. Where the riser goes into the basement, something is something there. Not a clog. A clog sounds different, hollow and solid, but here, the sound is as if something is pulsing, as if a heart is beating inside the pipe. Yanho opened his eyes. He lay there for another second. Then he got up and went to look for the basement. He found the staircase leading down around the corner, narrow and steep. The steps were worn down. People rarely came down here. There were no crystals or torches on the walls. Darkness. Yanho took a tuning fork out of the box and tapped it against the wall. The tuning fork hummed and glowed with a dim blue light. Yanho grunted. So the instruments here run on the same thing as everything else. That stuff flowing through the pipes. Mana, that's what the boy foreman called it. Mana. Let it be mana. To Yanho, it was just a working fluid, like water, only it glowed. The basement turned out to be enormous. The ceiling was lost in the darkness. Pipes ran along the walls in bundles, copper, bronze, some made of a material he couldn't identify, white and warm to the touch. Yanho ran his fingers along the nearest pipe. The vibration was even. The pressure was stable. This one was fine. He moved along the wall, checking every joint, every bend, every connection. The third joint on the left. There it was, a flanged connection. 4 bolts. One was missing. The second was tightened crookedly. The gasket between the flanges had rotted to a mushy pulp. A liquid was seeping from beneath the joint, not water. Something transparent with a faint blue glow. Mana. A mana leak. Yanho sighed. No matter how many centuries had passed, no matter what the world was like, a flange without a gasket is a flange without a gasket. He opened the box, found a substitute for the gasket, a flat ring made of a dense material resembling cork. He selected the right size. He got down on his knees. He loosened the remaining bolts. He removed the old, worn-out gasket. He wiped down the mating surfaces. He installed the new gasket. He tightened the bolts in a crisscross pattern, evenly, just as he'd been taught, just as he'd done 1,000 times. The leak stopped. Now for the valve. He walked further down the basement. He found the valve 20 meters away. It was large, bronze. The handle was covered in green patina. It hadn't been touched in 50 years. Yanho tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. Seized up. He tapped the body with a tuning fork. He listened. Everything inside was intact. It had simply seized up. He found something similar to penetrating lubricant in a box, a small vial of oily liquid. He dripped some onto the stem. He waited. He counted to 60. He tried again. The valve turned. It was tight, but it turned. A quarter turned counterclockwise. Somewhere up above in the pipes, something gurgled. Then there was a rush of water. Then it evened out. The flow started. Yanho stood in the darkness of the basement and listened as the water found its way. A familiar sound, the most natural sound in the world. No matter what world you're in, water flows down, always down. And if you don't get in its way, it'll take care of everything on its own. He went upstairs. He walked into the bathroom in the second wing. He turned on the faucet. The water came out in a steady stream. Clear. No gurgling. No jerks. He turned off the faucet. He checked the drain. It was draining normally. Job done. On his way out, he ran into a woman, not young, wearing the same gray smock as he did. Her hands were red. Her back was hunched. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and surprise. She asked if he had really fixed it. Yanho nodded. She said no one had dared go in there for 3 months. She said the magician plumbers had refused. They said there was a hissing sound coming from inside. Yanho asked what magical plumbers were. She explained, special magicians who maintain the water system, but they don't actually fix anything. They scan the pipes with expensive artifacts and write reports. Then they leave, and nothing changes. Yanho nodded. It was a familiar story. In every organization, there are people who write reports instead of grabbing a wrench and tightening a nut. He returned to the cubicle. He sat down on the cot. He looked at his new hands. Young, strong, without calluses. No calluses yet, anyway. That would change. A toolbox stood at his feet. Pipes hummed overhead. Somewhere far beyond the walls of this stone labyrinth lay a life he didn't understand. Magic, the academy, resonance, faculties, all of this was foreign to him, but the pipes were his. He closed his eyes and began to map out the layout in his head, every turn, every descent, every sound he'd heard along the way. There was the staircase from the cubbyhole, 12 steps up, corridor to the right, second wing, vertical riser, a 45-degree bend, basement, 20 meters to the vent, a flange with 3 bolts out of 4. It was just one small piece, one fragment of the system, and the system was enormous. He could feel it. Pipes ran everywhere, under every wall, under every floor, a whole network, alive, humming, neglected, unmaintained for 200 years. Yanho lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. 200 years without maintenance. In Seoul, pipes were replaced every 20 to 30 years and still burst. But here, 200 years. Either these pipes were made of something incredible, or the whole system was held together by a promise and would soon burst. He suspected the latter. That evening, the young neighborhood chief came by. He stood in the doorway. His face was different, not haughty, but bewildered. He asked how Yeonho had figured out where the valve was. He said there hadn't been a diagram for 200 years. He said the magician plumbers had searched for a month and hadn't found it. Yanho didn't look up from the bowl of porridge that the same woman from the hallway had brought him. The porridge was bland and watery, but it was hot. That's what mattered. He replied that he didn't need a diagram. Water knows where it wants to go on its own. The morning began with a loud bang. Someone was pounding on the door of the small room with something heavy. Yanho sat up on the cot. His body reacted faster than his mind. A young body, not his own. But he was already getting used to it. He opened the door. Standing there was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a broad face and hands like shovels. He wore a gray robe, just like Yeonho's, only old and patched in 10 places. On his belt hung a bunch of keys the size of a fist. The man looked Yeonho up and down. Then he looked around the storeroom, then at Yeonho again. He said his name was Master Cho. He said he was the senior caretaker of the service wing. He said that yesterday, water had suddenly started flowing throughout the entire second wing, and that half the staff thought it was a miracle while the other half thought a pipe was about to burst. He asked if this was his job or not. Yeonho said it was. Master Cho nodded. He was silent for a moment. Then he said that the previous guy in this position lasted 3 weeks. Before that, there was another one. He lasted 4 days. He said the job was lousy. They pay with food and a place to sleep. No one respects them. The master plumbers treat them like dirt. The students don't even notice them. The professors only remember them when something's leaking. I asked why Yeonho hadn't run off in the middle of the night like everyone before him. Yeonho shrugged. He replied that the pipes were interesting. Master Cho gave him a long, strange look. Then he snorted. He said they'd go on a tour. The tour took 4 hours. Master Cho knew the academy like the back of his hand. 30 years in the service wing. He started out as a boy running errands, worked his way up to senior staff. That was the ceiling. There's no path higher for someone with 0 resonance. He led Yeonho through all the floors, 5 main buildings, the central tower, 4 wings facing the cardinal directions. Between them were courtyards and passageways. Below were the basements. Beneath the basements were even more basements. Beneath those was something Master Cho didn't mention. He just shook his head. He said they didn't go there. He said it had been sealed off long ago. Yeon Ho memorized everything, every corridor, every staircase, every door, but most importantly, he listened for the pipes. They were everywhere, in the walls, under the floors, behind the ceilings. The network was immense. Someone, 800 years ago, had designed a system that supplied the entire complex with water and mana. A complex floating above the ground. Yeon Ho stopped in the middle of the hallway when he realized this. He asked Master Cho exactly how the academy floated. Master Cho explained, the 4 pillars of the elements, huge columns of crystallized mana, they hold the entire complex aloft. Yeon Ho nodded. He asked where the water came from if the complex was in the air. Master Cho blinked. He said it came from below, from the ground, up through the pillars. Yeon Ho nodded again. So, the pillars aren't just supports, they're water-lifting columns. Water rises up through them into the complex, and mana rises along with the water. Brilliant. Insane. And if even one pillar fails, the whole system will crash. He didn't say that out loud. He just made a mental note of it. By noon, they had inspected 3 of the 4 wings. Yeon Ho counted 42 problems, 14 leaks, 9 clogs, 7 malfunctioning valves, 5 damaged risers, 3 completely dead sections where no water was flowing at all, 2 sections where the water was flowing in the wrong direction, and 2 nodes from which that very strange sound was coming. A pulsation, like a heartbeat in the pipe. Master Cho couldn't hear it. Yeon Ho checked. He asked if Master Cho could hear that rumbling from the 3rd junction. Master Cho put his ear to the pipe. He shook his head. He said he couldn't hear anything, so only Yeon Ho could hear it. That meant it was connected to what had happened yesterday, with the chill in his wrist. He remained silent again. For lunch, they went into the kitchen of the service wing. It was a long, low room with a soot-stained ceiling, a stone stove, cauldrons, the smell of boiled rice, and something that smelled like turnips. Behind the counter worked a short, round-faced girl in an apron white with flour. She moved quickly and precisely, a ladle in one hand, a bowl in the other. She poured, she set it down. Next, Master Cho said this was Min Sora, a cook, the best cook at the academy. Only no one up above would admit it because she's from the service wing. Yeon Ho took the bowl. He sat down on a bench. He took a bite, porridge, but not like yesterday's. This one had herbs in it, some kind of oil, pieces of something sweet, delicious, truly delicious. He finished it in 3 minutes. He walked over to the counter, set down the empty bowl, said it was the best thing he'd eaten since he'd arrived here. Soru looked up. Her eyes were large, dark, and surprised. Apparently she didn't hear that very often here. She quickly looked away, but Yeon Ho noticed the corners of her lips twitch. After lunch, Master Cho led him to the 4th wing, the western wing, the artifactors' wing. Everything was different here. The corridors were wider. The walls were covered with runes. The air smelled of metal and hot oil. Master Cho walked more quietly. He said they had to be more careful here. The artifactors didn't like it when servants made noise. They could cast a spell on them. They had the right to. Yeon Ho nodded. Business as usual. In Seoul, too, there were facilities where workers weren't treated well. The main thing was to do the job and keep a low profile. They went down to the basement of the West Wing. The pipes here were different, not bronze and copper like in the rest of the academy. A white material, warm. Yeon Ho touched it with his palm. The temperature was higher than the others, and the vibration was different too, not steady, but intermittent, as if the flow were coming in jerks. That's bad. Jerks mean instability. Instability means risk. He walked along the pipe, looking for the source of the jerks. Master Cho followed behind, saying nothing. He watched. 15 meters further on, Yeon Ho found it. The joint where 2 pipes met, one bronze, one white. Long ago, someone had connected them directly without an adapter, without a seal. They'd simply inserted one into the other and sealed it with something like clay. The clay had long since dried out and cracked. Mana was seeping through the cracks. But it wasn't blue like yesterday. It was black, thick, with a smell that Yeon Ho couldn't identify. Not organic, not chemical, something else. Master Cho saw the black liquid and turned pale. He said they had to leave. He said this was it, black water. 3 years ago, it had started appearing in the fountains. The administration had banned any discussion of it under threat of expulsion. For staff, under threat of dismissal, which meant being thrown out onto the street without a penny. Yan-Ho crouched down in front of the joint. He looked at the black liquid. He sniffed it. Not poisonous, not caustic, just mana. But it was tainted, stale, like water in a pipe that hadn't been flushed in years. Sludge builds up there. Bacteria. Rust. The water turns brown and starts to stink. It was the same here. Only with mana. He didn't do anything. Not yet. This junction required preparation. He needed to figure out where that pipe led, where the black mana was coming from, and why right here, at the junction of the bronze and the white material. They went back upstairs. Master Cho was quiet for the rest of the day. At dinner, he sat next to Yan-Ho. He said nothing. Then he said quietly that rats used to die here, with their eyes burned out. He said there was a humming sound in the basements at night. He said the servants were afraid, but kept quiet because they had nowhere else to go. Yan-Ho listened. He ate Sora porridge. He remained silent. He thought. Black mana. Dead rats. A rumbling at night. The administration that forbids speaking out. 200 years without maintenance. The system was on the brink. He'd seen this in Seoul. Not dead rats, of course, but neglected networks. Networks held together by a promise. Where management had ignored emergency reports for years. Where a breakdown was a matter not of if, but of when. It was the same here, only the scale was different, and so were the consequences. The third day began with a scandal. Yan-Ho woke up to a scream in the hallway. A woman's voice. Shrill and angry. He opened the door to the storage room and saw the scene. A girl in a tailored combat academy uniform was standing over a woman in a gray robe and screaming. The woman on her knees was pressing her chest. Yan-Ho recognized her. It was the one from the second wing, the one who'd been surprised that he'd fixed the toilet. The girl in the uniform was screaming that her robe had been ruined, that the laundry room had given her dirty water, and that brown stains remained on the white fabric, that she would report it to the dean and everyone here would be fired. The woman remained silent, staring at the floor. She was used to it. Yan-Ho approached. He stood between them. The girl paused. She looked at him. A gray robe, dirty hands, a nobody. She asked what he wanted. Yan-Ho calmly asked which faucet the dirty water had come from. The girl was flustered. Then she replied that it was from the laundry room. Yan-Ho nodded. He said it wasn't the laundress's fault. He said there was a problem with the water supply system. He said he'd fix it. The girl snorted. She said that a piece of trash wasn't going to tell her what to do. She turned around and walked away. Her heels clacked against the stone. The woman on the floor raised her head. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She'd forgotten how. Yan-Ho helped her to her feet. He asked where the laundry room was. She led him there. The laundry room was in the basement of the north wing, a long room with a low ceiling, steam, heat, stone troughs along the walls. Water flowed from copper faucets directly into the troughs. 5 women were working there, all in gray robes. All of them had red hands. The lye was eating away at their skin. There were no gloves. There was no hot water, only cold. To do the laundry, they had to heat water in a cauldron over a fire and then carry it in buckets. Yan-Ho stood in the doorway and watched. It felt familiar, a different era, a different world, but the same scene. People doing hard manual labor because no one had bothered to set up a proper system. He walked along the wall. He found the pipes. 2 lines, cold and hot. The hot one wasn't working. The valve was shut off. He checked. The valve wasn't just shut off. It had been bricked up. Someone had sealed it with the same material used on the joint in the artifactor's basement, clay or something similar, on purpose. Yan-Ho crouched down. He felt the walling. It was old, 30 years, maybe more. 30 years ago, someone had deliberately shut off the hot water in the laundry room. He asked the women how long they'd been without hot water. They exchanged glances. The older one said there had never been hot water as far as she could remember, and she'd been here for 20 years. Yan-ho nodded. He went back to the bricked-up valve. He took out his tools. He began chipping away at the clay. The work took an hour. The clay turned out to be more than just clay. It contained flecks of something crystalline, something shiny, mana. Someone had sealed the valve with magic, not powerful magic, but enough to prevent an ordinary person from opening it. Yan-ho wasn't a mage, but he had a tuning fork and 8 years of experience. He worked methodically, removing layer after layer. The tuning fork helped. When Yan-ho held it up to the magical seal, it began to vibrate and the crystals crumbled. Not immediately, gradually, but they crumbled. By the end of the hour, the valve was free. Yan-ho turned the handle half a turn. The pipes began to gurgle. The faucets gurgled. Then brown water spurted out, then some more. Yan-ho waited. The women stood by the wall and watched. 3 minutes later, clear hot water began to flow from the faucets. Steam rose toward the ceiling. The head laundress slowly approached the faucet. She held out her hand. She pulled it back. It was hot, but not scalding. She held it out again. She looked at her red, chapped palm under the hot water. She turned to Yan-ho. She didn't say thank you. She didn't know how, but her face said it all. Yan-ho nodded and left. Master Cho was waiting for him in the hallway. He stood against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was complex. He said that Yan-ho shouldn't have touched the sealed valve. He said those seals weren't put there for no reason. He said there would be trouble. Yan-ho asked what kind. Master Cho fell silent. Then he said quietly that when you start tampering with something that's sealed, they notice. Upstairs. Yan-ho asked who was upstairs. Master Cho didn't answer. He just shook his head and walked away. Yan-ho stood in the hallway. He thought, a sealed valve. A magical seal. Someone had deliberately shut off the hot water for the laundromats 30 years ago. Or more. Why? He didn't know. But he knew one thing. If the system was designed with a hot water loop, then the hot water loop had to work. Period. He spent the rest of the day in the East Wing. This was where the healer's department was located. It was cleaner, quieter. It smelled of herbs and something sweet. The pipes here were in better condition than in the other wings. The healers apparently took better care of their space. But even here there were problems. One riser was flowing in reverse. The water wasn't going down. It was going up. Against gravity. In the normal world, that's impossible. Here, where mana flowed along with the water, it meant that the mana pressure in the lower circuit was higher than in the upper one. A reversed gradient. Yan-ho stood in front of the riser and thought. In his world, backflow was prevented by a check valve, the simplest of devices, a flap that allows flow in only one direction. He looked inside the box. There was no check valve. But there were parts, a plate, a spring, and an axle. He sat down on the floor and in half an hour assembled a check valve from what was available. It was crude and makeshift, but it worked. He fitted it into the riser. The reverse flow stopped. The water flowed downward as it should. He stood up. He wiped his hands on his smock, and then a voice sounded behind him. Quiet, a woman's voice, unfamiliar. The voice asked what he had just done. Yan-ho turned around. A girl was standing in the doorway, young, about 17. She was wearing a combat academy uniform, though it was worn and tattered. The collar was torn, the sleeve was roughly mended. Her hair was tied back haphazardly, her eyes were dark, empty, no, not empty, extinguished. She wasn't looking at Yan-ho, but at the pipe, at the spot where he had installed the valve. She looked as if she'd seen something impossible. Yan-ho replied that he'd installed a check valve to keep the water from flowing upward. The girl asked what a check valve was. Yan-ho explained. A simple device, a plate on a shaft. When the flow goes in the right direction, it presses the plate against the wall. When the flow goes in the opposite direction, it presses the plate against the seat and closes it. The water goes only where it's supposed to. The girl listened. Her eyes changed. Something lit up in them. She asked if the same thing could be done with mana. not with water, but with mana, so that the mana would flow only in one direction and not flow back. Yon-ho looked at her, then at the pipe, then back at her. He said he didn't know, but in theory, if mana flows like water, then yes, it's possible. The girl nodded. She stood there for another second. Then she turned and left, quickly, almost running. Yon-ho stood in the hallway of the east wing and thought, a strange girl. Her combat faculty uniform was in poor condition. Her eyes were dull. The question about the mana that was leaking away. He didn't know her name. Not yet. That evening he found the north wing, the runic faculty. This was the worst of it all. The pipes weren't just leaking, they were screaming, a high-pitched, thin sound on the verge of audibility. Yon-ho felt it with his teeth before he heard it with his ears, a vibration at a frequency that resonated with his bones. In the basement of the north wing, he found yet another pulsating node, the third one, that very same sound. For the first week, Yon-ho worked like a machine, up before dawn, inspection rounds, repairs, inspection rounds, repairs, dinner, map, sleep. Out of 63 problems, he resolved 31, simple things, clogs, leaks, malfunctioning valves, rotten gaskets, loose connections. Every repair yielded a result that people noticed. The floors in the second wing stopped sloshing, hot water appeared in the laundry room, and for the first time in decades, the women were able to do laundry without burning their hands. In Soru's kitchen, the water pressure from the faucet stabilized, and the porridge stopped burning because now the pots could be washed properly. The service wing was changing, slowly, unnoticed by those upstairs. But down below, everyone could feel it. Master Cho stopped looking at Yon-ho with suspicion. He began to look at him with something resembling respect. On the 6th day, he brought him a second robe, a clean one. He said it was unbecoming to wear just one. Yon-ho accepted it in silence. He nodded. It was more than just a robe. It was recognition. On the 7th day, what he had been waiting for happened. The artifactor's wing. The basement, that very junction of the bronze and white pipes from which black mana was seeping. Yon-ho had been preparing for this repair all week. He'd studied the approaches, he'd listened to the pipes, he determined the direction of the flows. The black mana was coming from below, from the fourth circuit, through the white pipe. It rose to the joint and seeped out through the cracked mortar. The joint wasn't just a connection between two pipes. It was a transition point between the main system and the fourth circuit. Someone had deliberately connected them 800 years ago. And then someone else had tried to seal that joint, to hide the connection, but poorly, sloppily, without proper gasketing. Yon-ho went down to the basement that morning, alone. Master Cho didn't go. He said he couldn't. He said his legs wouldn't take him where the black water was. Yon-ho didn't press the issue. He grabbed a box, he grabbed a rag. He wrapped it around the lower part of his face. Safety first. In an unfamiliar environment, protect your respiratory system. The first rule of an emergency responder. He walked over to the joint. He crouched down. He examined it. Over the past week, the black mana had increased. It was no longer oozing. It was dripping, steadily. Slowly, drip, drip, drip. On the floor was a puddle the size of a palm. Yon-ho took out his tuning fork. He tapped the white pipe. The sound, deep, lingering. The tuning fork vibrated for a long time, more intensely than usual. The white material resonated with it differently. Yon-ho tapped the bronze pipe next to it. The sound was short, dry. The difference was like that between the living and the dead. The white pipe was alive. It carried within it something more than just water. He removed the old mortar completely. He exposed the joint. Without the mortar, it was clear that the pipes were simply inserted into one another. The gap was a finger's width thick. The black mana flowed through this gap, but not just black mana. Looking closer, Yon-ho saw that within the black stream there were thin threads, transparent, pure. They shimmered like glass fibers inside dirty water, mana within mana, pure within the impure. So the fourth circuit carried more than just poison. It carried something else, something that had stagnated and rotted after 800 years of inactivity, but at its core, it was pure. Yan-Ho knew this story. He'd seen it dozens of times. A main line that had been shut off and forgotten. The water inside stands still. It rots. It becomes covered in silt. But if you open the flow and flush the system, the water will become clean again. You just need to let it a path. He worked for 2 hours. He removed the bronze pipe from the joint. He smoothed out the edges. He found a suitable adapter in the box. Not perfect. Slightly larger in diameter, but with a gasket he cut from a spare seal, it fit tightly. He reassembled the joint. Bronze. The adapter with the gasket, white material. He tightened it, checked it. No leaks. The black mana was no longer dripping out, but it was still flowing inside the white pipe, upward, into the Academy's system. I had to figure out what to do about it, flush it out. But how do you flush a circuit that ran under the entire Academy? I needed to open the drain valve, a place where I could drain the dirty mana until clean mana started flowing. He began searching. He went down the white pipe, deeper into the basement, to the place Master Cho had told him not to go. Darkness. The tuning fork glowed dimly. The pipe disappeared into the wall. Beyond that, a wall. A dead end. No, not a dead end. Yan-Ho tapped on the wall. There was a void beyond it. Wide, echoing. A room, a walled-off room. He didn't break it open. Not now. Not with these tools. Not alone. Instead, he climbed back up and did something else. He found a spot where the white pipe ran alongside the sewer drain, 2 meters between them. He took a short section of bronze pipe out of the box, a piece he'd removed from a joint. He fitted it as a bridge between the white pipe and the drain. He placed a valve on the bridge. He opened it a quarter of the way. Black mana flowed into the sewer, slowly, in a thin stream. Drainage, temporary, makeshift, but it worked. An hour later, the black mana began to lighten. After 2 hours, blue streaks appeared in it. After 3, it was gray. Yan-Ho sat on the basement floor and watched as the fourth circuit slowly cleared, pipe by pipe, layer by layer. 800 years of grime were flowing down the drain. And then it happened again, just like on the first day. Only stronger. Not a coolness, but cold. Not just in his wrist, but in both hands, up to his elbows, as if he dipped his hands into a mountain stream, and with the cold came knowledge. Not words, not images, a sensation. He suddenly realized he could do something with water that he couldn't do a minute ago. He could summon it. Yan-Ho reached out his right hand toward the faucet protruding from the wall 3 meters away from him. The faucet was turned off. He pulled. Not with his hand, with something inside him. With that coldness flowing through his veins, the faucet wobbled. The handle turned on its own. A quarter turn, water began to flow. Yan-Ho lowered his hand. He watched the flowing water, then at his hands, then at the white pipe from which he had just drained the dirty mana. The small circle of water of will. The first seal. The one that awoke on the first day. It had been like a sprout. Now it had become a tree. He could control water, not powerfully, not from far away. A faucet 3 meters away was the limit, but yesterday he couldn't do anything. The connection was obvious. He repairs the system responds. The cleaner the pipes, the stronger what flows through them, and the stronger his connection to it. Yan-Ho turned off the faucet with his hand. An ordinary human hand. He stood up, gathered his tools, went upstairs. On the stairs he ran into a man he'd never seen before. Tall, thin, in a white uniform with silver embroidery. His face was narrow, his eyes were cold. He looked down at Yan-Ho, then at his toolbox, then at his smock, stained with black mana. He asked what the servant was doing in the artifactor's basement. Yan-Ho replied that he was repairing a joint. The man in white asked again which joint. Yan-Ho explained. The connection between a bronze and a white pipe. A leak. Black liquid. He replaced the adapter and installed a gasket. The man in white remained silent. Something was changing in his expression, something Yon-ho couldn't quite read. Then he turned silently and walked away. Quickly, his heels clacked against the stone. Master Cho was waiting upstairs. He saw Yon-ho's face and immediately asked who he'd met. Yon-ho described him. Tall, thin, a white uniform, silver embroidery. Master Cho turned pale. That's Vice Rector Kim, the rector's right-hand man, the man who keeps an eye on what's happening in the basements. Master Cho grabbed Yon-ho by the shoulder. His fingers were strong, they were trembling. He said quietly that if Vice Rector Kim had gone down to the artifactor's basement, it meant he'd sensed something. Something had changed. And now he knew what it was. Yon-ho had done it. Yon-ho looked at Master Cho, then at his own hands, at the first calluses on his own fingers. He wasn't going to be afraid. He wasn't going to hide. He's a plumber. He fixes pipes. That's his job. If someone doesn't like that the pipes are working, the problem isn't with the plumber. The problem is with whoever decided the pipes should be broken. He pulled his shoulder free. He told Master Cho that he was going to have dinner. Soru's porridge wouldn't wait. 10 days at the academy. Yon-ho had established a routine. Morning, rounds of the lower levels, checking the drainage in the artifactor's basement. The black mana was almost gone. Gray mana was flowing through the bridge. Soon, blue mana would follow. He could feel it. In the afternoon, minor repairs. In the evening, the map. The map had become three-dimensional. In his mind, the academy existed as a cross-section. Floor by floor, pipe by pipe. He saw the system as no one else did, not even those who built it, because those who built it knew what they had laid down. But Yon-ho knew what remained of it 800 years later. It was a fundamental difference. People began coming to see him. Ha-yoon was the first to arrive, a laundress, the very same senior laundress. No, not the senior one. Yon-ho found out later. She was 19. Her red hands and hunched back made her look older. She came in the evening. She stood in the doorway of the small room. She was silent. Then she held out a cloth to him containing rice cakes. They were warm, with sesame seeds. Yon-ho took them. He thanked her. He asked her name. She replied quietly, "Ha-yoon." She paused. Then she said that the hot water had changed everything. She said her hands had stopped cracking. She said that for the first time in years, the girls at the laundromat weren't crying at night from the pain in their palms. Yon-ho listened. He chewed on a cake. He nodded. Then he asked why she was working at the laundromat if she was only 19. Ha-yoon fell silent for a long time. Then she said she was at the laundromat because she was afraid of water. Yon-ho didn't understand. She explained. When she was 13. Her sister, the well, the cultists. Ever since then, she's been doing laundry every day, 10 hours, because while she's doing laundry, she controls the water. She decides when the water comes and when it goes. If she stops, the water will come on its own. That's what she thinks. She knows it's not true, but her body doesn't know. Yon-ho stopped chewing. He looked at her red hands, at her slender fingers clutching the edge of her apron. She stood in the doorway and waited. What was she waiting for? Maybe condemnation, maybe pity, maybe just for him to say something, anything. Yon-ho finished his flatbread. He stood up. He said he'd come to the laundromat tomorrow. He said he wanted to fix something. Ha-yoon nodded and left. Quickly, she practically ran away. The next morning, he arrived at the laundromat early before work started. He brought his tools. He worked for 3 hours, completely remodeling Ha-yoon's workstation. The drain used to be open, so water would pool on the floor, leaving her feet wet all day. He installed a covered drain with a grate. Now the water drains away immediately. The floor is dry. He switched the water supply from constant flow to manual. Now water only comes out when Ha-yoon turns on the faucet. Her decision, her control. He found some wooden slats in the basement. He nailed together a grate. He placed it on the floor in front of the sink. Now her feet aren't on cold, wet stone but on warm, dry wood. He adjusted the hot water temperature more precisely. It doesn't scald, it doesn't chill, just right, warm enough to soothe her hands without stinging. When Hyun arrived at work, she paused in the doorway. She looked. For a long time. Then she walked over to the faucet. She placed her hand on the handle. She turned it. Water flowed, warm, steady, obedient. She could stop it at any moment. She turned off the faucet. The water stopped. She turned it on again. Water flowed. She turned it off. It stopped. She did this 5 times, 6, 7. Each time, the water obeyed. Each time it stopped when she wanted it to. On the 8th time, Hyun began to cry, quietly, silently. Tears streamed down her cheeks and dripped onto the wooden grate beneath her feet. Yeon-ho stood in the doorway. He was silent. Then he said quietly that the water wasn't evil. He said that no one was just listening to it. Hyun didn't answer, but she stopped crying, and she began to do the laundry. For the first time in 6 years, she was doing laundry without fear. Yeon-ho left. Soru was waiting for him in the hallway. She was standing by the wall with a bowl of porridge. It was hot, with the same herbs and oil. She handed it to him. She said he hadn't eaten breakfast again. Yeon-ho took the bowl. He ate standing right there in the hallway. It was delicious. Soru watched him. Then she said she'd heard about the laundry room, about the hot water, about what Yeon-ho had done. She said quietly that she had a problem in her kitchen too. The water pressure from the faucet fluctuates. The boilers aren't flushed evenly. Sometimes the porridge burns and other times it's watery. She's been trying to explain this to the plumbers for 3 years, but they never show up. They say the kitchen in the staff wing isn't a priority. Yeon-ho nodded. He said he'd stop by today. He went in after lunch. The kitchen. The problem turned out to be simple. The main water valve for the kitchen was defective. The stem was bent. When opened, the flow was uneven. Yeon-ho straightened the stem. He replaced the washer. He adjusted it. He checked it. The water pressure was even and steady. Soru turned on the faucet. She watched the stream of water. It was steady, without any jerks. She filled the pot with water and put it on the stove. Half an hour later, the porridge was ready. She scooped up a spoonful and tasted it. She froze. Yeon-ho saw the look on her face change. He asked what was wrong. She silenced. She held out the spoon to him. He tasted it. The porridge was different, not just delicious. There was something to it, a warmth that didn't come from the temperature but from somewhere deep inside. It spread down his throat and into his chest, like a sip of hot tea on a freezing day. Only stronger. Sora looked at the porridge, then at her hands, then at Yeon-ho. She said quietly that nothing like this had ever happened before. She said that porridge had always been just porridge, but now it was healing her. Yeon-ho thought for a moment. Then he understood. The faucet, steady pressure, a steady stream of water carrying mana. Before, the flow would break up and the mana would come in a chaotic rush. Now it was even, and this steady mana was being absorbed into the food, through the water, through the fire, through Soru's hands, hands that knew how to cook. The mana had found its master. He didn't try to explain. He just nodded. He said the water had become cleaner, and that was why the taste was different. Soru looked at him. She didn't believe him, but she didn't ask any questions. That same evening, Yeon-ho ran into the girl in the tattered uniform again. She was sitting on the stairs between the 2nd and 3rd levels, in the dark, alone. He was coming up from the basement with a box on his shoulder and nearly stepped on her. She looked up, the same lifeless eyes, only now there was something else in them. Despair. Yeon-ho set down the box. He sat down next to her, without asking, without speaking. He just sat there. They sat in the dark for a minute, 2, 3. Then she spoke. She said her name was Yuna Park. She said they shared the same last name, a coincidence. She said she had been the best in the combat department 2 years ago. Then the resonance broke down. Her mana began to leak away. Every day there's less than the day before. The healers don't know why. The professors have written her off. Her classmates stopped saying hello. Now she wears a worn-out uniform because they didn't issue her a new one. She's on the verge of being expelled, and after she's expelled, she has nowhere to go. A general's daughter who can't cast spells, it's a disgrace. She can't go home. Yeon-ho listened. He remained silent. Then he asked one thing. He asked where exactly she felt the mana leaking out. Yuna was surprised. No one had ever asked where before. Everyone had asked why. She pointed it out. She touched herself just below her ribs, on the right. Here. It's leaking from here, like water from a bucket with a hole in it. Yeon-ho nodded. A check valve. That's what she'd been asking about last time. Her body was like a pipe with backflow. Mana wasn't flowing where it should, not outward but inward and back again. Losses with every cycle, like a system without a check valve. He wasn't a healer, not a mage, not a doctor, but he knew about pipes, and if the body is a system of channels through which mana flows, then the principle is the same. Block the backflow. Give the flow a direction. He didn't say this out loud. It was too soon. He didn't know enough. He didn't know how mana worked in the body. He didn't know if engineering principles could be applied to a living person. Instead, he said something else. He said he needed an assistant, someone whose hands wouldn't shake at the sight of a rat. He asked if she was suitable. Yuna looked at him for a long time. In the darkness, her eyes shone. Not with despair. Something else. A spark. Small, dim, but alive. She said she was suitable. Yeon-ho took a spare tuning fork out of the box. He handed it to her. He said to meet him tomorrow morning by the basement of the East Wing, early. She nodded. She took the tuning fork. Their fingers brushed for a moment. Her hand was ice cold. Yeon-ho stood up. He picked up the box. He walked into the storage room. On the stairs, he turned around. Yuna was still sitting there, but not like before. Her back was straighter. Her head was held higher. In her hand was the tuning fork, which glowed softly blue. It cast a light onto the wall, a small light in the darkness. It was enough for a start. Yeon-ho returned to the storeroom. He sat down on the cot. The coolness in his hands pulsed steadily. The drainage was working. The fourth circuit was being cleansed. The map in his head was half. 63 problems had become 32. Master Cho brought him a second robe. Sora carried porridge. Hyun carried flatbreads. Yuna Park took the tuning fork. And somewhere upstairs, Vice President Kim was reporting to the president that something had changed in the basements. Yeon-ho didn't know this, but he could feel it. The pipes were telling him. The vibration in the walls had changed. It was tense. As if someone upstairs was listening. Let them listen. He's a plumber. He's doing his job, and anyone who doesn't agree with that can go down to the basement themselves and replace the gasket. He closed his eyes. The pipes were singing, quietly and clearly, clearer than yesterday. And somewhere deep below, in the fourth circuit that ran beneath the entire academy, something enormous and ancient turned over in its sleep. It didn't wake up, it just turned over. And exhaled, and from that exhalation, the water throughout the entire academy became 1 degree warmer for a second. No one noticed, except for Yeon-ho. He lay in the darkness of the small room and felt that 1 degree with every cell in his body. Something down there knows he's here. Something down there is waiting. For the first time since his rebirth, he felt uneasy. But his hands didn't tremble. A repairman's hands don't tremble. They work. Tomorrow, he'll go deeper. He'll find the next joint. He'll fix the next pipe. Step by step. Deeper and deeper, until he reaches whatever is breathing at the bottom. Yuna arrived 10 minutes early. She stood at the entrance to the basement of the East Wing, a tuning fork in her hand, her back straight, the same uniform as always, worn, but buttoned all the way up. Yeon-ho nodded to her and went downstairs. She followed him. Without asking where or why, For the first 2 hours he taught her to listen, not with magic, with her ear. Place her palm against the pipe, close her eyes, feel the vibration, determine the direction of the flow, find the spot where the vibration changes. That's where the problem is. Yuna listened in silence. She tried, she made mistakes, she tried again. She had good hands, strong and precise, the hands of a general's daughter who had been taught to wield a weapon since childhood. Only now, instead of a sword, a tuning fork, instead of an enemy, a pipe. 2 hours later, she found her first clog on her own. A pipe in the wall on the 3rd level. The clog wasn't deep, a matter of minutes, but she found it by sound, without artifacts, without magic, with her ear and her palm. Yanho nodded. He said it was fine. Yuna didn't smile, but her shoulders straightened another centimeter. By noon, they had cleared 4 clogs and replaced 2 gaskets. Yanho worked. Yuna handed him tools. She held the tuning fork to provide light. She kept an eye on the flow. He was a quick learner. No, she was a quick learner. At lunch in the kitchen of the service wing, Sora gave Yuna a long look. Wearing a combat faculty uniform at the servants' table was unheard of, but Yanho sat down and Yuna sat next to him. Sora set a bowl of porridge in front of her. Yuna asked. She froze. She looked at Soru. Soru turned away. Yuna finished her meal in silence, a flush on her cheeks, the first in a long time. The healing porridge was doing its job. After lunch, Yanho went down to the artifactor's basement to check the drainage. Yuna went with him. The drainage bridge was working. The mana from the 4th circuit was no longer gray, but bluish, almost pure. A couple more days and the flushing would be complete. But Yeonho noticed something new near the bridge, on the wall, scratches, fresh ones. Someone had scraped the stone with a tool, removing a layer, looking for something. Or checking. Yanho ran his fingers over the marks. Fresh, yesterday or this morning. Vice Dean Kim, no one else. He'd been here, watching, examining what Yanho had done, and he left without touching anything. That was worse than if he'd broken it. If he'd broken it, it would mean he was afraid. If he left it alone, it meant he was watching, studying, reporting. Yanho told Yuni about it. She turned pale. She said that Vice Rector Kim isn't just the president's right-hand man. He's the head of internal security. He has an artifact that detects magical traces. Every spell leaves a trace. If Yanho had used water will even once, Vice President Kim would see it. Yanho remembered the faucet he'd turned on from a distance, just once. Right here in this basement, a week ago. The trace remained. He could feel it, a thin thread of mana between him and that faucet, invisible. But to the vice president's artifact, it was as visible as a lantern in the dark. Yanho cursed, in his mind. He didn't say anything out loud. Instead, he walked over to the faucet. He wiped away the trace, not with magic, with a rag and water. He rinsed the faucet. He rinsed the pipe next to it. If a magical trace is like a fingerprint, then water washes it away. It should wash it away. Mana flows with water, so water is both the medium and the solvent. He rinsed it thoroughly. 20 liters ran through the faucet. Then he checked. The coolness on his wrist was gone. The connection to the faucet had vanished. Clean. Yuna watched this with her mouth agape. She asked what he'd just done. Yanho replied that he'd washed the faucet. Yuna said that a magical trace couldn't be washed away with water. It was impossible. Even the Inquisition's cleanup methods require special reagents and 3 hours of work. Yanho shrugged. He said that the water here wasn't ordinary. The water here is mana, and mana dissolves mana. You just have to pour enough of it in the right direction. Yuna was silent. Then she said quietly that he was crazy. Yanho didn't argue. They went upstairs. In the 3rd-floor hallway, someone was waiting for them. Not Vice Dean Kim. Worse, 3 students from the combat faculty, 2 guys and a girl. Their uniforms were new, their faces were cocky. The kind of people Yanho knew from Seoul, middle management, petty power and big ambitions. One of the guys spotted Yuna and smirked. He called her by her last name, Park, like a spit in the face. He said he could see she'd found her place, next to the trash. He said trash sticks to trash. The second guy laughed. The girl looked on indifferently. Yuna froze. Her hands clenched into fists. The tuning fork turned white between her fingers. Yan Ho saw how she was holding herself, how she was clenching her teeth, how something dark and painful flashed in her eyes. He stepped forward. He stood between her and the three of them, calmly, without provocation. He asked the first guy if it had been a while since he'd checked the water in his room. The guy was taken aback. What water? Yan Ho said that, according to his calculations, the third-level riser has been carrying a reverse current of mana for a week now. If he's not mistaken, the rooms of the combat faculty on this floor are receiving contaminated mana from the sewer system. He said it wasn't dangerous. Not yet. But in a month their hair would start falling out, then their nails, then their teeth. That is, of course, if he's interested. The guy turned pale. He looked at his hands, at his nails, then at Yan Ho, then at his girlfriend. All three of them left quickly. Yuna turned to him. Her eyes were wide. She asked if it was true about the reverse current. Yan Ho shook his head. No. He'd fixed the reverse current on the third day. Yuna blinked. Then she understood. Then she laughed, quietly, dryly, for the first time all day. Yan Ho smiled and continued down the hallway. Yuna followed him, tuning fork in hand. They reached the north wing, the runic studies department. Yan Ho hadn't worked here yet. He'd only listened to the pipes during his rounds with Master Cho. It was the worst here. The high-frequency vibration he could feel in his teeth. The pipes were screaming. Yuna heard it too. She winced. She said it hurt. Yan Ho nodded. He went downstairs. The basement of the north wing was different. The walls were covered with runes, not decorative ones, but functional ones. They glowed with a dim red light. Yan Ho pressed his palm against the wall. It was warm, no hot. The runes were warm. Why? He walked along the wall, looking for the source. The pipes here were made of copper, old, green with patina, but intact beneath the patina. Sturdy material. The problem wasn't the pipes. The problem was what was flowing through them. The flow of mana in this basement was wrong. Yan Ho could feel it. Water will pulsed quietly in his wrists. Mana wasn't moving through the pipes. It was moving around them, through the walls, through the runes. Runes aren't decorations. Runes are pipes, a different kind, magical channels imprinted in stone. And they were clogged, 200 years without maintenance. The runes were encrusted with a magical equivalent of scale. Mana couldn't pass through them and was looking for detours, through the copper pipes, which weren't meant for that. That's where the vibration came from. That's where the screech came from. The metal resonated from the mana flowing through it instead of the stone. Yan Ho sat down on the floor. He looked at the runes. He thought. This wasn't his field. He was a plumber, not a runologist. But the principle was the same. The channel is clogged. Clear the channel. The flow will go where it's supposed to. He took out a tuning fork. He held it up to the rune. He tapped it. The tuning fork hummed. The rune hummed in response. Resonance. The two sounds met and, for a second, became one. At that moment, the rune flared brighter. The red turned orange, then yellow, then white. Then it faded, but not completely. The dull red became slightly brighter than it had been. The tuning fork vibrated for another 10 seconds. Yan Ho set it aside. He looked at the rune. It had become clearer, not completely, but the layer of grime on it had thinned. A single touch of the tuning fork wasn't enough. More was needed. It had to be done systematically. But the method worked. Yuna stood behind him and watched. She said quietly that it was impossible. The runes in the north wing hadn't been cleaned in 200 years because it required a fifth circle rune master. There were only 2 such people at the academy. And they didn't work in the basements. Yan Ho replied that a fifth circle rune master apparently does it in a complicated and expensive way, but he does it simply and cheaply. A tuning fork, resonance, cleansing. Yuna was silent. She looked at him with that gaze he was beginning to recognize, a mixture of distrust and something resembling hope. They spent 3 hours in the basement of the north wing. Yon-ho purified 32 runes out of roughly 400, a drop in the ocean. But it was already having an effect. The vibration had subsided. The screeching grew quieter, not silence, but bearable. By the end of the 3rd hour, Yuna began to help. She held the tuning fork up to a rune. She tapped it. She waited for resonance. She'd take it away. She wasn't as good at it as Yon-ho. The runes responded more weakly, but they did respond. She asked why her response was weaker. Yon-ho thought for a moment. He replied that it wasn't a matter of strength but of frequency. Each rune resonates at its own frequency. You have to find the right one. He chooses intuitively. 8 years of tapping on pipes. His ear finds the right tone on its own. Yun needs time. She nodded. She had time. She had nothing else. But she had time. They went upstairs for dinner. In the kitchen, Soru served them double portions, porridge, bread, some vegetables. Yon-ho ate greedily. 3 hours with a tuning fork in the basement is hard work. Not physically, something else. Every time the tuning fork resonated with a rune, Yon-ho felt something draining from him, not mana. He had almost no mana left. Something else, attention, concentration. It was as if each rune took a piece of his focus. By the end of the 3rd hour, his head was buzzing. After dinner, Master Cho approached him. His face was serious. He took him aside. He said quietly that the rector had summoned him this morning. He asked about the new servant in the basements, his name, his age, where he came from, what he does. Master Cho replied that the new servant repairs pipes. The rector asked what kind of pipes. Master Cho replied that he repairs whatever kind he can. The rector fell silent. Then he said that the new servant must be watched. If he goes where he shouldn't, it must be reported, immediately. Master Cho told Yon-ho that he had reported it. That Yon-ho only repairs what's broken, that he doesn't go deeper than the usual basements, that he causes no problems, only good. Yon-ho listened. He nodded. He understood. The rector knows, or is beginning to know. Vice Rector Kim reported it. Marks on the wall, a check valve, drainage, flushing the 4th circuit. Every action Yon-ho took left traces, not magical ones, physical ones, new connections, new gaskets, a jumper in the basement. For a man who knows what's locked away down there, every repaired component is a warning sign. Yon-ho thanked Master Cho. He shook his head, said there was no need to thank him, said that Yon-ho was the first person in 30 years who fixes things instead of breaking, the first to go down to the basement not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to. He said he was old and tired, but as long as Yon-ho was working, he'd cover for him, as best he could. Yon-ho looked at him, a burly man with hands like shovels. 30 years in a gray robe, 30 years invisible, and yet he still has his back covered, because that's the right thing to do. Yon-ho nodded silently. He went back to his little room, lay down, closed his eyes, the map in his head updated, the north wing, the rune channels, 400 runes in the basement, 32 cleared, 368 left. At the current pace, 40 days of work. If Yuna helps, 30. If he improves the method, 20. Time. He needs time. And silence. And he needed the rector to leave him alone until he was finished. The pipes hummed within the walls, quieter than yesterday, cleaner. The 4th circuit continued to flush. The drainage was working. And somewhere down below, whatever was breathing in its sleep turned over once more. Yon-ho could feel it. 1 degree. The water had grown warmer by another degree. 1 month, 30 days at Cheongmyong Academy. Yon-ho sat on the floor of his tiny room and took stock. Of the 63 initial problems, 11 remained. All 11 were deep, serious, requiring access to levels below the usual basements, to the places Master Cho had told him not to go, the place from which the 4th circuit rose. For now, Yon-ho hadn't touched them, but everything else was working. The academy was changing, not on the outside, from the inside. In the service wing, they'd forgotten what wet floors were. Hot water flowed steadily. The faucets didn't leak. The drains didn't get clogged. The laundry room ran like clockwork. Ha-Yun smiled more often, not broadly, just at the corners of her lips, but more often. She came to see him every evening with flatbreads. They sat in the little room and said nothing. Sometimes she talked about her childhood, about the village in the south, about her sister, about the well. Her voice was steady, without tears. Yeon-ho listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity her. He just listened. Ha-Yun would leave and come back the next evening. Soru's kitchen became a place of pilgrimage. The porridge was healing. It was no longer a secret in the service wing. One of the maids told a student she knew. He tried it. He told another. Within a week, underclassmen began dropping by Soru's kitchen. Soru shooed them away. She said the kitchen wasn't a dining hall, but she'd pour them a bowl anyway. And everyone left with a warmth in their chest that lasted until evening. Yuna worked with him every day, mornings in the basements, lunch at Sora's. After lunch, the north wing, runes. They cleared 140 out of 400. The vibration dropped by half. The pipes in the north wing stopped screaming. They began to sing, quietly, barely audible, but singing, not screaming. Yuna was getting better with the tuning fork. Her hands remembered precision, the general's daughter, trained in thousands of sword movements. Now that precision was put to use. She was tuning the frequency faster and faster, 20 runes a day, then 25, then 30, and something else. Yeon-ho noticed it in the third week. When Yuna held the tuning fork to a rune and entered resonance, something changed, not only in the rune but in her as well. Her complexion, her movements, her voice. After an hour of working with the runes, she looked more alive, brighter. Her eyes were ablaze, not dimmed, burning. Yeon-ho thought about this. Resonance. That was the word by which everything was measured here. The body's innate ability to respond to flows of mana. Yuna's resonance had broken at 15. Mana began to leak away, a reverse current, but when she worked with the tuning fork, she entered into resonance with the runes. External resonance, not through the body, but through an instrument. And this external resonance did what her broken body could not. It gave the mana direction. The tuning fork acted as a check valve. As long as she held it in her hands, the mana flowed correctly from the rune through the tuning fork, through her hand and into her body, in only one direction, no reverse current. Yeon-ho didn't tell her. Not yet. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to see the results of a month's work. Instead, he simply gave her more work with the tuning fork, more runes. More hours in the basement. Yuna didn't complain. For the first time in 2 years, she felt needed. That was more important than any explanation. On the 23rd day, what Yeon-ho had both been waiting for and fearing happened. The artifactor's wing, the basement, the drainage system, mana from the fourth circuit flowed blue, pure. The flush was complete. Yeon-ho closed the valve. The bypass was no longer needed. The fourth circuit was clean, in this section, and the moment he closed the valve, a chill exploded in his hands. It didn't hurt, but it was powerful. As if someone had turned the faucet on full blast and, instead of water, an icy waterfall had gushed out. Water will had reached a new level. Yeon-ho stood in the basement and sensed the water. All the water. Throughout the entire west wing, every faucet, every pipe, every drop. He could turn on any faucet in the artifactor's wing without moving from where he stood. He could direct the flow into any pipe. He could stop the water at any point. It was like an extension of his body. Before, it was 3 meters. Now, an entire wing. He stood there and breathed, slowly, steadily, in control, because if he didn't control it, it would burst out. The wave of mana he was feeling right now was immense, and it wasn't coming from him. It was coming from below. From the fourth circuit, the clean circuit was giving off power. Yeon-ho hadn't asked for it. The circuit was thanking him, like the pipes in Seoul after being flushed. The flow goes more easily. The pressure stabilized. The system was breathing. Only here the system was breathing literally. He stood there for 10 minutes, getting used to it, getting the hang of it, memorizing its limits. Then he closed his eyes. He pulled the sensation back into his hands, into his wrists. He tucked it deep inside. No need to show it off. No need to stand out. Vice Rector Kim is watching. The rector is asking questions. Mana that's visible is mana that will be found. Mana that's hidden is mana that works. He gathered his tools and went upstairs. On the stairs, he ran into not Vice Rector Kim, but a person he'd never seen before. A woman, young, red-headed, freckled, wearing a uniform of a different cut than the others, a different color, different embroidery, Western style. She was standing in the middle of the staircase with a huge bag in one hand and an unfolded map in the other. She was looking back and forth between the map and the walls, muttering something in a language Yeon-ho didn't know. He tried to walk past her. She blocked the staircase with her bag. She looked at him. Big green eyes, a scattering of freckles, a smile that appeared instantly, as if it were built into her face by default. She asked him in broken local language with a terrible accent if he knew where the artifactor's workshop was. She said she'd been looking for an hour and a half. She said the map was lying. Yeon-ho looked at the map. The map wasn't lying. The map was upside down. He silently turned the map over in her hands. The woman looked at it. She blinked. She laughed, loudly, openly, without restraint. She said she was an idiot. She held out her hand. She introduced herself, Emily Carter, an exchange student from the Empire, an artifactor. Yeon-ho shook her hand. He introduced himself. She asked what he was doing there with a toolbox. He said he was fixing pipes. She said she loved fixing things, that her parents had never let her do it at home, that she'd come here to finally work with her hands instead of sitting at receptions. Yeon-ho listened. He usually didn't talk to strangers for so long, but Emily wouldn't let him stay silent. She talked for 2 people, for 3, for the entire department. She told him her story in the 5 minutes it took them to walk to the artifactor's workshop. The daughter of a major artifactor, a family business, engaged to some count she'd seen twice, escaped under the guise of an academic exchange, been here for 3 days already, got lost 4 times, eats alone in the cafeteria because she hasn't made friends with the Eastern students and there are no other Westerners here. They reached the workshop. Emily stopped. She looked at the door, then looked at Yeon-ho. She asked seriously if she could sometimes come down to his basement. She said she was curious about how the pipes were set up at this academy. She said that in the Empire, artifact makers make pipes from a completely different material, and it was important for her to compare them. Yeon-ho shrugged. He said the basement wasn't his. Emily smiled. "Great, Mr. Park," she said, with such an accent that his last name sounded like the name of an exotic fruit. She went into the workshop. Yeon-ho stood in the hallway and thought that his life at the academy was becoming too crowded for someone who was used to working alone in flooded sewers. That evening in his tiny room, Yeon-ho sat with his eyes closed. The map was updating. The 4th Circuit in the West Wing was clear. The coolness was. Water will has reached a new level. The runes in the North Wing are 1/3 cleared. Yuna is growing stronger. Soru is feeding her. Hayun arrives. Emily has appeared. Master Cho is covering for him. The rector is watching. Vice Rector Kim is studying. 11 deep problems await, and down below, in the 4th Circuit, something enormous is breathing and counting his steps. Yeon-ho opened his eyes. 1 month, 30 days. He's still alive. The pipes are working. The people around him are starting to eat their fill and sleep in the warmth. Not bad for a start. He lay down and fell asleep in 30 seconds. An emergency responder's habit. Sleep when you can, because soon you won't be able to. On the 35th day, Yeon-ho went down to the basement of the artifactor's wing and found his connector cut off. A clean, smooth cut. Not with a crowbar or an axe. Magic. Someone had neatly removed the bronze pipe he'd wedged between the 4th Circuit and the sewer. The joint was open again, but it wasn't leaking. The fourth circuit had already been flushed. There was no point in removing the bridge, technically speaking, so this wasn't a repair. It was a message. Yan-Ho crouched down in front of the cut. He ran his finger along the edge, smooth, warm. A magical cut leaves warmth behind. That's what Yuna had said. Fresh, at night. Someone had come here at night and cut away his work. Didn't break it, didn't brick it up like before. Cut it away. Showed what they could do. Showed what they see. Yan-Ho stood up. He looked around. The basement was empty, quiet. The pipes hummed steadily. The fourth circuit pulsed calmly. But on the wall next to the cut, he saw something new. A symbol, burned into the stone. A circle with a vertical line inside. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it hadn't been there yesterday. He went back upstairs and found Yuna. He described the symbol. She turned pale. She said it was the mark of prohibition. Only the rector places it, personally. It means the area has been declared off-limits. Anyone who enters without the rector's permission is subject to immediate expulsion. For a servant, it's worse. For a servant, it means trial and hard labor. Yun-Ho nodded. So the rector had stopped monitoring. He began to act. The jumper was a minor issue. The prohibition symbol was a wall. The rector had cut off his access to the fourth circuit in the west wing. Yun-Ho thought about it for 2 days. He worked as usual. Minor repairs. Runes in the north wing. Yuna by his side. Everything went according to schedule, but his mind was focused on something else. On the map. The fourth circuit ran beneath the entire academy. The rector had sealed off one access point, but Yun-Ho knew the map. He knew all the points. The fourth circuit emerged to the surface in 8 places, 8 nodes. The rector had sealed off 1, 7 remained. On the 37th day, he went to the basement of the east wing. The faculty of healers, the cleanest basement, the best maintained pipes, and here, 3 levels below the main basement, he found the fourth circuit's second exit, a white pipe, warm, pulsating. The connection to the main system was cleaner here, not bricked up, not abandoned. Someone had been keeping an eye on it, not the rector, someone else. Yan-Ho examined the connection. High-quality work. The gasket was intact. The bolts were tightened correctly, crosswise and evenly. He paused. Who at this academy knows how to tighten bolts correctly? Mages don't do it that way. Servants don't go down that deep. Master Cho said he never goes below the regular basements. Someone had been maintaining this junction regularly, secretly. He didn't touch it. Instead, he memorized it. He added it to the map. He went back upstairs and headed to the library. He'd never been there before. There had been no reason to go. The library occupied the upper floors of the central tower. High ceilings, shelves reaching to the sky. Silence. The smell of old paper and wax. He wasn't looking for books. He was looking for pipes. There were pipes here too, behind the bookshelves, in the walls, under the floor, thin, almost invisible. They didn't carry water, they carried heat, a heating circuit. Yan-Ho walked between the bookshelves and listened. The pipes here sang differently, softly, melodiously, a beautiful sound. Someone, at some point, had tuned them like a musical instrument. He reached the end of the hall. A dead end. A wall. Nothing behind the wall. No, not nothing. A door, small, inconspicuous. Between 2 bookcases, a sign on the door, restricted section, access only with permission from the head librarian. Yan-Ho heard a sound coming from behind the door. Drops, steady, frequent, a leak. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. There was a rustling behind the door. Then the lock clicked. The door opened just wide enough for a hand. An eye peered through the crack. One, behind a pair of glasses. A pale face, a woman's. The eye looked at Yan-Ho, then at his toolbox, then at his robe. A voice, quiet, like the rustling of pages. She asked what he needed. Yan-Ho said she had a leak. A pause. The eye blinked. The door opened wider. A woman, about 28 years old, pale, wearing gloves, slender hands, her hair tucked under a cloth bandage, Behind her was the room. Bookshelves. Bookshelves, scrolls, and a puddle in the corner, under a pipe running along the ceiling. It had been dripping for a long time. The floor was swollen, the wooden planks had buckled. Some of the scrolls on the bottom shelf had darkened from the moisture. Yon-ho stepped inside. He took a look around. A leak at the joint of the heating pipe. A simple job. 10 minutes. He set down the box, took out his tools, climbed up to the ceiling. The pipe was thin, copper. The joint had come loose from the vibration. He tightened it, replaced the gasket, checked it, dry. Then he climbed down and looked at the floor. A puddle. He needed to clean it up. He found a rag in the box. He started wiping it up. A woman was standing by the bookshelf, watching him, silently, wearing gloves. Her hands were clutching the edge of her apron. Yon-ho mopped up the water. He checked the scrolls on the bottom shelf. They were damp, but not ruined. He was lucky. He straightened up. The woman remained silent. He said it was done. It wouldn't leak anymore. She nodded. Then she said quietly that the leak had been going on for 3 months. She'd filed a report 4 times. No one came. It was a restricted section. No one was, not even repairmen. She'd been plugging the hole with rags. Every morning she'd wring them out. Every evening she'd plug it up again for 3 months. Yon-ho looked at her gloves, at her pale face, at the room crammed with books and scrolls, at the small window near the ceiling through which light barely filtered. She lived here, among the forbidden books. Alone. 3 months with a leak that no one wanted to fix. He told her that if anything else came up, she should tell Master Cho, or Yoon. They'd find him. The woman nodded. He turned toward the door, and that's when he felt it. Here, right under his feet. The 4th Circuit. Not just nearby, right here. A white pipe ran under the floor of the forbidden section, and it was pulsing more strongly than anywhere else. Yon-ho froze. He looked down, then at the woman. She was looking at him. And in her eyes he saw something he hadn't expected. Recognition. She knew. She knew what was under the floor. She knew what he was feeling. Yon-ho said quietly that something big was breathing down here. He asked if she knew. The book slipped from her hands. She didn't drop it. It slipped. Her gloved fingers unclenched on their own. The book fell onto the wet floor. The woman didn't pick it up. She looked at Yon-ho. Her eyes were wide. Her lips were slightly parted. And then she began to cry. Not loudly, not sobbing, quietly. Like Ha-yoon by the faucet, tears streamed down from under her glasses, and she didn't wipe them away. Yon-ho stood there and waited. He didn't comfort her. He didn't touch her. He just stood beside her. A minute later, she took off her glasses. She wiped her eyes with a glove, put them back on. Looked at him. She said quietly that her name was Choe Ari, head librarian of the restricted section. She said she knew. 8 years, alone, bound by an oath. She couldn't tell him, but he figured it out on his own. For the first time in 8 years, someone had figured it out on their own, and she didn't have to break her oath. Yon-ho picked up the book from the floor. He wiped the cover. He placed it on the table. He sat down in the chair across from her. He said he wasn't in a hurry. He said he had time, and that he knew how to listen. Choe Ari sat down across from him. She took off her gloves. Her hands were slender, white, dark lines on her wrists, not veins, runes. The oath was literally inscribed on her body. She couldn't speak about what lay beneath, literally. The runes on her wrists blocked her speech, but Yon-ho had spoken the words himself. He had figured it out, and now she could confirm it. Not tell. Confirm. A difference that changed everything. Yon-ho began to ask, carefully, that what was down there was alive. She nodded. It had been locked away for a long time. A nod. 800 years. A nod. They call it a demon. A nod. But it's not a demon. A pause. Then a slow nod. Yon-ho felt a chill run down his spine. Not the water will. Ordinary human cold. Fear. Not a demon. Something else. Something they locked away and called a demon so no one would ask questions. He asked more. The academy is built like a prison. A nod. The students don't know. A nod. Their classes fuel the seals. A nod. She sat across from him and nodded to every question. 8 years of silence slipped away with each nod. Yonho asked his final question. The one down there. He's dangerous. Choe-Ari paused. The runes on her wrists flared red. She winced in pain. Her oath forbade her from answering that question. So that's what matters most. That's what the Guardians are hiding the most, whether he's dangerous or not. Yonho stood up. He said he'd be back. Choe-Ari nodded. For the first time in 8 years, she had someone to talk to who knew. Someone she didn't have to explain everything to from scratch. Someone who understood the pipes and understood that the pipes weren't just pipes. Yonho left the restricted section. The door closed behind him. The lock clicked. He stood in the library amid the bookshelves and the silence. The map in his mind updated. A new node. The restricted section. The fourth circuit runs directly beneath it. Choe-Ari knows the truth. The academy is a prison. There's no demon down there. The students are guards who don't know they're guards. He walked down the hallway, back toward the stairs, past students in white uniforms, past professors in robes, past stained glass windows through which light streamed. All of them. Every single one. They're here for one reason, to keep the lid in place, 800 years, and no one knows, except the rector, except Choe-Ari, and now, except for the plumber in a gray smock with a toolbox slung over his shoulder. 2 months. Yeon-ho sat on the roof of the service wing. His legs dangled over the abyss. The academy hovered above the ground, clouds below. Beyond the clouds, the city. The capital of the kingdom of Hiran. He wasn't afraid of heights. 8 years spent in wells and mines. After that, height was simply the other side of depth. Yuna sat beside him, a tuning fork in her hand, a habit. She never let it go, even when she wasn't working. Yuna had changed over the past 2 months. Her cheeks had filled out, soru porridge. Her back had straightened, work in the basements. Her eyes burned, runes, the tuning fork, a purpose. She wasn't casting spells yet, not in the traditional sense, but something was building up inside her, like water behind a dam. Yonho could sense it through his water will when he stood next to her. The flow of mana in her body was shifting. The backflow was diminishing, less and less with each passing day. The tuning fork was doing its job. Yuna asked what he was thinking about. Yonho replied that he was thinking about the pressure. Yuna snorted. She said he was always thinking about pressure. Yonho shook his head. Not that kind of pressure, a different kind. The rector was putting pressure on him, quietly, methodically. Something happened every 3 or 4 days. First, a no-entry sign was posted on the artifactor's basement. Then, the spare toolbox that Master Cho kept in the storage room disappeared. Then Sora received a reprimand for feeding students outside of class hours. Then Ha-Yoon was summoned to the dorm supervisor and told that the laundry room would switch to cold water starting on the 1st of next month because the hot water line was needed for the new wing of the faculty building. Each blow was a small one. Each one struck those close to Yeon-ho. Not him, them. The president didn't touch the plumber. He went after those the plumber had fixed. Yeon-ho knew this tactic. He'd seen it in Seoul. Bosses who can't fire an irreplaceable specialist start putting pressure on the people around him until those people themselves ask him to leave, or until he leaves to protect them. Clever. Underhanded. Yeon-ho had no intention of leaving, and he had no intention of letting them suffer. He needed a move. Not a forceful one, an engineering one. He found it on the 40th day, winter. The academy stood high above the ground, and, in winter, the wind cut right to the bone. The heating system was running at 30% capacity. The central tower and the faculty building were heated normally. So was the combat faculty. The fire engineers heated their own rooms themselves. The rest were freezing. The service wing wasn't heated at all. Ever. Yanho knew why. The heating circuit ran from the third node of the fourth circuit. The node was clogged. Same as it had been for 800 years, same old story. The mana had stagnated, the circuit had become clogged, but this node wasn't just a clog, it contained a seal, the second of 8. Yanho could sense its water will, the other one, hot, not water, but fire, a seal of fire. He'd been preparing for a week, studying the pipes, calculating the pressure, checking every joint, every valve, every connection in the heating circuit, drawing the diagram not on paper but in his head. A habit. Paper leaves traces, the mind doesn't. He found the node in a deep basement beneath the central tower, 3 levels down, the deepest accessible level. Below that lay only what was behind the wall, what was bricked up, what breathes. The node was enormous. Not a pipe, but a chamber, a stone cavity the size of a room. 4 pipes ran through it. White material. The fourth circuit. A mechanism stood in the center of the chamber. Yanho stared at it, unable to believe his eyes. It was a heat exchanger. Primitive by 21st century standards, but ingenious for the world of medieval magic. The 4 pipes of the fourth circuit transferred the heat of mana into the chamber. The chamber heated the water in the heating circuit. The water flowed upward through the risers and heated the academy. Simple, elegant, and completely clogged. The heat exchange surfaces were covered with a crust as thick as a finger. Magical scale. 800 years. The valves were corroded, the gaskets had rotted away. Only one of the 4 pipes was working, and that one was operating at a quarter of its capacity. That's why the academy is freezing. That's why the fire mages are burning themselves out trying to heat their rooms. That's why the service wing isn't heated. The system was designed for full capacity, for 4 pipes, for a functioning heat exchanger. It could heat the entire academy evenly and consistently, including the service wing, including the basements, including every corner and every corridor. Yanho smiled. For the first time in 2 months, a wide, broad smile. This was his territory, his element, the heat exchanger, scale, valves, gaskets. It was Seoul. January. A break in the main heating line. 300 apartments without heat, 24 hours to fix it. He'd done this before, more than once. Only here, the scale was greater, and instead of a welding machine, a tuning fork. He went down to the junction at night, alone. He didn't take Yoon. It was dangerous, not physically, politically. If he were caught cleaning the third junction, it could be chalked up to a diligent worker's zeal. If he were caught with the general's daughter, it would be a conspiracy. He worked for 6 hours, until dawn. He scraped the scale off the heat exchange surfaces, the tuning fork, and patience. Resonance, layer by layer. His hands ached, his head was buzzing, but he didn't stop. He restored 3 of the 4 valves. The 4th was completely destroyed. It needed to be replaced. He made a temporary plug out of whatever he had on hand. It'll last a month, then he'll have to find the right valve. He replaced all the gaskets. By dawn, 3 of the 4 pipes were open. The heat exchanger was operating at 75% capacity. The heat started flowing. Yanho stood in the chamber and felt the hot water rising through the risers, upward, floor by floor, to the spout behind the wing, in all directions, evenly for the first time in 200 years, and then the second seal broke. Not coolness, heat. It struck his chest like a fist, hot and dense. Yanho doubled over. He clung to the edge of the heat exchanger. He stood like that for a minute. Then the heat moved inward. It spread throughout his body. It became a part of him, the seal of fire, the small circle of fiery will. Now he could sense more than just water. Heat, the temperature of every pipe within the radius of the entire floor. He could raise it by a degree, lower it, direct heat from one riser to another, not powerfully, not intensely, but precisely, like a regulator on a boiler. He went upstairs. Morning, the service wing, the hallway, and the first thing he felt was warmth. The walls were warm, the floor was warm, the stones that 8 generations of servants had known only as cold were now warm. In the kitchen, Soru stood by the stove and touched the wall with her palm. Her eyes were wide, teary. She wasn't crying. She was simply holding her hand on the warm stone and couldn't bring herself to move it. In the laundry room, Hayun was sitting on the wooden grate he'd built for her. Her bare feet rested on the warm wood. The warmth from the floor radiated through the grate. She sat there and smiled, not just with the corners of her lips, with her whole face. It was quiet at breakfast in the service wing, unusually quiet. Everyone ate in silence. Sora's porridge, hot, warm walls, warm floor, warm hands. No one said thank you. There was no need. Everything was clear enough as it was. After breakfast, Master Cho approached Yanho. His expression was strange, not joyful, not anxious. Something in between. He said quietly that the warmth had spread not only to the service wing. The warmth had spread everywhere, to all the buildings, to all the rooms, including the faculty quarters, including the rector's office. For the first time in 200 years, the academy was uniformly warm. Everywhere. And everyone knows it, everyone feels it, and everyone is asking how it happened. Yanho finished his tea. He set down his mug. He said it wasn't him. He said he'd just tightened a couple of valves in the basement. Master Cho looked at him for a long time. Then he shook his head. He said that Yanho was a lousy liar, but that he didn't care. Because for the first time in 30 years, his feet wouldn't be freezing in the mornings. Yunho nodded. He stood up, he walked toward the door, and turned around. At the kitchen entrance stood a girl, a little girl, a freshman. He'd never seen her before. She stood in silence. Then she bowed, deeply, to the waist, and left. A second one followed her in. She bowed, she left, a third, a fourth. Yanho stood and watched. They came in one after another. Silently, they bowed and left. Female students, underclassmen, the ones who had frozen all winter in distant rooms where the heat never reached. They didn't know who had done it, but they knew where he ate. Rumors spread quickly at the academy. Then the entire staff of the administrative wing stood up. Then half the combat faculty, the ones who had come to Sora for porridge. They stood up and remained silent until Yonho came out. He walked down the hallway, feeling their gazes on his back. Not hostile, not envious, grateful. Warm floors, warm walls, warm eyes. It was warm in the rector's office that morning, too. For the first time that winter, Rector Yoon Hyun-soo didn't have to light the fireplace. He sat at his desk and looked over Vice Rector Kim's report. And his face was pale, not from the cold, because a plumber in a gray smock had just fixed what the rector had been obliged to keep broken. 3 days after the heating was restored. Silence. Yeon-ho was waiting for the blow. The blow didn't come. That was worse. Master Cho moved as quietly as a shadow. Hayun brought in flatbreads, but her hands were shaking. Yuna had stopped smiling. Everyone could feel it. Something was brewing, like pressure in a pipe before it bursts. On the 4th day after the heat exchanger was repaired, Yonho came into the kitchen for breakfast and found Sora in tears. She was sitting on the floor amid broken pots. The shelves were empty. The pots were overturned. Someone had ransacked the kitchen during the night. Not a natural disaster, not an accident. People. Yonho crouched down beside her. He didn't ask. Sora spoke up on her own. She said 3 people had come, wearing masks. At night, they said the kitchen in the staff wing was closing for renovations, a decree from the administration. Sora said she hadn't seen the decree. They replied that she didn't need to see it, and they started smashing things. She didn't resist. What could she do? She was small, round-faced, against 3 masked men. Yonho stood up. He looked at the wreckage, pots and pans, shelves, supplies scattered on the floor, flour spilled, oil spilled. It would take a week's work to clean it all up. He began to clean up. Silently, he picked up a pot, put it back in its place. The second, the third. Soru watched. Then she stood up and began to help. Hayun came in. Without a word, she grabbed a rag. Yuna came in. Silently, she picked up a shelf, screwed it back in place. An hour later, the kitchen was in order. Not like before. Some of the were irreparably broken, but it was functional. Soru cooked porridge in the surviving pot. For everyone, they ate in silence, at one table. 5 of them, Yonho, Soru, Yuna, Master Cho, who had come when he heard the crash, 5 in gray robes, 1 in a worn-out uniform, 1 in an apron. Yonho chewed his porridge and thought. The rector had shifted from pressure to destruction. It made sense. The previous methods hadn't worked. The plumber hadn't left. Those around him hadn't turned their backs. The warmth at the academy had become a trump card that couldn't be taken back, so he had to strike harder. At the kitchen, at the food, at the most vulnerable spot. The next step was obvious. The laundry room, Yonho's closet, Master Cho, Yuna, one by one, or all at once. Yonho wasn't going to wait. He finished his porridge. He stood up. He said he'd be back soon. He went upstairs, not to the basement, not to the pipes, to the central tower, to the rector's office. The hallway in front of the office was wide and bright. Marble, stained glass windows, 2 guards at the door, in white uniforms with gold embroidery, 4th Circle combat mages, the elite. They saw Yonho and exchanged glances, a gray robe, a toolbox, dirty hands. He approached them. He said he needed to see the rector. They didn't budge. One asked what the matter was. Yonho replied that it was regarding the water supply. The guard smirked. He said the rector doesn't receive servants. Yonho nodded. Then he said calmly that if the rector didn't see him in 10 minutes, the hot water in the faculty building would run out in 20 minutes. In 30 minutes, the cold water would run out. In an hour, the heat would go out, throughout the entire academy. The guards exchanged glances again. One of them walked out the door. He returned a minute later. The door opened. The rector's office was large, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, light, warmth. A man sat at a dark wooden desk, 62 years old, gray hair, perfect posture, a handsome, stern face. When he spoke, his voice was like a cello, low, warm, deceptively soft. Rector Yoon Hyun-soo. He looked at Yeon-ho without contempt, without malice, with something resembling interest, like a scientist observing an unusual insect. He said he'd heard about him, a lot. He said he was impressed. A servant who, in 2 months, had accomplished what master plumbers hadn't in 200 years, a self-taught plumber. A rarity. Yeon-ho stood in the middle of the office, a box on the floor, hands at his sides, but his back was straight. He didn't bow. He didn't lower his eyes. He looked straight ahead. As an equal, he wasn't an equal. By any measure of this world, he was a nobody, zero resonance, a gray robe, a servant, scum. But he stood as an equal because behind him were the pipes, all the pipes of this academy. And the rector knew it. Yeon-ho spoke. Briefly, without ceremony, he said that during the night his people had ransacked the kitchen in the service wing. He said it was a mistake. He said he wasn't looking for a fight. He was a plumber. He fixed pipes. That was all. But if anyone laid a finger on his people again, he'd shut off the water. All of it, everywhere, with a single turn of the valve. And he'd explain to the entire academy why. The rector listened. His expression didn't change. His voice was just as soft when he replied. He said that was a threat. Yeon-ho replied that it was a technical warning, like the sign on a boiler. Do not touch. Hot. The rector looked at him. 10 seconds. 20. Then he leaned back in his chair. He said that Yeon-ho didn't understand what kind of game he'd gotten himself into. He said that what lay beneath wasn't a toy. He said that for 800 years, people smarter and stronger than Yeon-ho had kept that lid shut. He said that every seal Yeon-ho removed was 1 millimeter, and that when there were enough millimeters have accumulated, the lid will burst open, and then everyone will die. All 300 students, all the professors, all the staff, everyone. Yeon-ho listened. He didn't interrupt. The rector spoke. At length, quietly, frighteningly. He wasn't threatening. He was explaining. and in his voice, Yan-ho heard not anger, but fear. Real. Deep. The fear of a man who has been standing on the manhole cover for 30 years and can feel it shifting. When the rector fell silent, Yan-ho replied. Just as quietly, he said he understood. He said he'd seen the manhole cover, he'd seen the pipes, he'd seen the fourth circuit, he'd seen the black manna, he'd seen the dead rats, he'd heard the rumbling. He said the rector was right, the manhole cover was shifting, but not because Yan-ho was repairing the pipes. It's because no one has repaired it in 800 years. The system is rotting, the seals are crumbling, the circuit is getting clogged. And if nothing is done, the cover will blow off, not in a year, not in 10, but in 3, maybe sooner. He said he wasn't going to remove the cover. He was replacing the gasket. The cover isn't needed if the leak is fixed. The rector was silent for a long time. Then he said one word. Naive. Yan-ho shrugged. Maybe. But he had seen the system, the entire system, like no one else had in 800 years, and the system was telling him that the rector's path led to disaster. And his path? Maybe that one too. But at least it offered a chance. The rector stood up. He walked over to the window, his back to Yan-ho. He looked down at the clouds, at the world he had protected for 30 years. Without turning around, he said he wouldn't touch the kitchen. He wouldn't touch the laundry room. He wouldn't touch the servants, but if Yan-ho went below the 3rd basement level, he would order him killed, personally. Without a trial, without warning. He said this wasn't a threat, it was also a technical warning. Yan-ho picked up the box. He said he understood. He walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned around. He said one more thing. He said the 4th valve in the heat exchanger needed to be replaced. He said the temporary plug would last a month. If the rector sent a proper valve, he'd install it. If not, by spring, the heating would be down to 1/4 of its capacity. The rector didn't turn around, but Yan-ho saw his shoulders tremble. He walked out. The door closed. The guards watched him go. He walked down the marble hallway, back toward the stairs. The box on his shoulder, a gray robe, dirty hands. The rector isn't an enemy. Yan-ho realized that during their conversation. The rector is a guardian, the last of those who know the truth, a man who has stood on the cover for 30 years because he believes it's the only way, and he's afraid, truly afraid, not for himself, for the 300 students upstairs, for the academy, for the world. That made him more terrifying than any villain. Because a villain acts out of greed, but a guardian acts out of conviction, and conviction cannot be broken, it can only be changed. Yan-ho returned to the service wing. He went into the kitchen. Soru was standing at the stove, cooking. She saw him and froze. Yan-ho sat down at the table. He said no one else would come to cause trouble. Soru looked at him, then she nodded. She set a double portion in front of him. Yan-ho ate and thought. The rector had given him a condition not to go below the 3rd level. This meant that 11 deep-seated problems remained unsolved, that he couldn't reach 5 of the 8 nodes in the 4th circuit, that the creature below to wait, it was a strict condition. 3 months at the academy. Yan-ho worked his way around it. Not down, but to the side. Not through the basements, but through the walls. The 4th circuit didn't run only vertically, it ran horizontally through the thickness of the stone, through the foundations of the pillars, through the floors between levels. The map in his head showed 2 nodes accessible from the 3rd level. The 4th node was located in the wall between the healer's wing and the central tower, not below, to the side. A white pipe ran horizontally through the stone mass at the depth of the 3rd basement level. Technically, Yan-ho wasn't violating the rector's ban. He wasn't going any lower. He was moving sideways. Yuna was helping. 3 months of working with the tuning fork had changed her. Her hands had grown more confident. Her gaze was sharper. And something else, too. On the 70th day, she was cleansing a rune in the basement of the north wing. Routine work, the tuning fork to the rune, resonance, cleansing. But this time, the tuning fork hummed differently. Louder, clearer, and the rune flashed not red but white, blindingly white. Yuna recoiled. The tuning fork slipped from her fingers and hung in the air. It spun, it hummed. The light wasn't coming from the rune. The light was coming from Yuna, from her hands, from a point just below her ribs on the right, from where she felt the mana leaking out. Only now the mana wasn't leaking out. It was flowing in the right direction, through her hands, through the tuning fork, into the rune, and back. A circle, a closed circle. The check valve had fallen into place, not a mechanical one, a living one. 3 months of working with external resonance had taught her body a new path. Mana no longer leaked into the void. It flowed through the instrument, through the runes, through the stone, and returned. Yan-Ho stood 5 steps away, watching. Yuna stood in the center of the basement, her hands raised. Around her, 20 runes glowed white, all at once, all on the same frequency. Resonance magic, not combat magic, not healing magic, a new kind, the kind not found in textbooks, the ability to resonate with any magical object and amplify it. Runes, artifacts, other mages' spells, she could amplify everything. Through the tuning fork, through touch, through her voice. The tuning fork sank into her palm. The runes went out. Yuna stood there, staring at her hands, then at Yan-Ho. Her eyes were wet, but not dull. They were burning. She asked what that had been. Yan-Ho replied that it was her. Just her. Yuna clenched the tuning fork. Her fingers turned white. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. Widely, for the first time in 2 years. That same day, Emily found him in the hallway. She burst in like a hurricane, grabbed him by the sleeve, dragged him into the artifactor's workshop. She spoke as she went, quickly, mixing words from the local language with Imperial. She'd found something, in the workshop wall, behind the shelf with the raw materials, a white pipe, the 4th circuit. She didn't know it was the 4th circuit, but she was an artifactor. She could sense materials, and this white material was something she'd never encountered before. She called Yan-Ho because he was the only person she knew who worked with pipes. Yan-Ho came. He looked. Behind the rack, there really was a white pipe. The 5th node. Not in the basement. In the workshop wall. On the 2nd floor, Yan-Ho looked at Emily. He asked if she could determine what the pipe was made of. Emily took out a set of tools, small, elegant, silver tweezers, a magnifying glass with a lens made of crystallized mana, a tiny hammer. She worked for 20 minutes. Then she looked up. Her eyes were huge. She said it wasn't metal, not stone, not wood. It was bone, living bone. The pipe was made of the bone of a living creature, a very large living creature. Yan-Ho stood there, staring at the white pipe, warm, pulsating, alive, bone. The 4th circuit isn't a pipeline, it's a skeleton, a circulatory system, the veins of a creature trapped beneath. The academy isn't built above the prison, the academy is built inside the prison. Walls, floors, pillars. All of these are parts of the body of a creature that was captured 800 years ago and walled up in stone. Alive. And they ran water pipes through its veins. Yan-Ho felt nauseous, not out of disgust, from realization. 800 years, a living creature, walled up, its veins used as pipes, its blood as mana, its heat as heating, its breath as ventilation. The entire academy is a parasite on the prisoner's body. He turned to Emily. He asked her to be quiet. She looked at him, then at the pipe, then back at him. She nodded, seriously, without a smile, for the first time, without a smile. Yan-Ho left the workshop. He walked down the hallway. His legs carried him on their own. His mind was working. The map was being rearranged. The white pipes aren't pipes. They're veins. The nodes aren't nodes. They're joints, organs, points where a creature's life is most concentrated. Seals, 8 seals at 8 nodes, 8 nails in the body of a living creature. Each seal is a lock on a joint, on an organ, on a nerve. He had freed 2, water and fire. That meant he had removed 2 nails, 2 out of 8. The creature below, Yanho stopped in the middle of the hallway. Its breathing, it turned over in its sleep. It raised the water temperature by 2 degrees. It had been calling him. From the very beginning, from the flooded sewer in Seoul, through death, through rebirth, it called for a plumber, not a mage, not a hero, a plumber, because mages have been hammering in nails for 800 years, and the plumber is the only one who knows how to pull them out. He went to see Che-Are, the forbidden section. He knocked. The door opened. She was waiting for him. She knew he would come. Yeon-ho sat down across from her. He said he knew. The white pipes are bone. The fourth circuit is the body. The academy is built on a living being. Che-Are nodded. At every sentence. The runes on her wrists remained silent. He spoke for himself. She didn't need to break her oath. He asked one thing, about what's down there. It's suffering. Che-Are closed her eyes. The runes flared. She clenched her teeth. Pain. The oath forbade it, but she nodded. Through the pain. Once, yes, it is suffering. 800 years. Yeon-ho stood up. He walked out. He walked down the hallway and felt every white pipe in the walls, every vein, every pulse, alive, suffering, waiting for him. He returned to the small room, lay down, didn't sleep, thought. Until morning. The plan changed. The goal remained. 6 months, half a year at Cheongmyeong Academy. Yeon-ho stood in the basement of the north wing in front of the wall behind which the forbidden level began. The wall was thick, 2 meters of stone. Beyond it lay the fourth perimeter, the 6th node. He had no intention of breaking through the wall. He intended to go around it. Veins run through the walls. Mana flows through the veins. Through the mana flows the connection. In 6 months, the water will had grown to encompass the entire academy. Yeon-ho could sense every drop of water in every pipe, every faucet, every riser, every node. The fire seal gave him control over heat. 2 seals out of 8, 2 nails out of 8 had been removed, and every nail that was pulled out made the creature below a little freer, a little stronger, a little closer. It was no longer just breathing in its sleep. It spoke, not with words, with images. Every night, Yeon-ho had the same dream. Water, a vast river beneath the earth, ancient, serene, and in this river someone lay, large, curled up, bound by chains of stone and metal, eyes closed, but lips moving. And this movement sent ripples across the water. The ripples became a wave. The wave rose up through the pipes, into the academy, into the pipes, into the faucets, into every glass of water the students drank. The creature did not scream. It did not cry out for help. It sang, a quiet, drawn-out song about the river that flowed before it was dammed, about the sky it saw before it was walled in, about the world that existed before it was called a demon. Yeon-ho would wake up from these dreams with his face wet, not from sweat, from tears. He worked. Every day, the runes in the north wing were finished, 400 out of 400, all cleared. For the first time in 200 years, the rune studies department was operating at full capacity. The professor of rune studies came down to the basement to take a look. He stood there in silence. Then he left. The next day, a box appeared outside Yeon-ho's cubicle. Inside was a set of rune tools from the professor's no note. Yeon-ho accepted it. Yuna was now working on her own. Her resonance magic grew stronger with each passing day. She could amplify any spell within a 20-meter radius with a touch, a tuning fork, or her voice. The combat faculty took notice. Rumors began to spread. A student with 0 resonance was suddenly amplifying others' spells 3-fold. The dean of the combat faculty summoned her. It was a long conversation. Yuna returned with a new uniform. Clean, unblemished, with an insignia that hadn't been there before. Resonator, a new specialization, the first in 100 years. She came to see Yeon-ho that evening. She showed him the uniform. She stood up straight. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. She said the dean had offered her a chance to return to the faculty. Full status, a private room, a scholarship, everything she'd had before. Yanho asked what she'd decided. Yuna said she'd agreed. A pause. Then she said she'd come to the basements every evening, to work, just like before. Yanho nodded. She left, in her new uniform, with a tuning fork in her hand. She hadn't put it away in the drawer. She kept it out in the open, like a weapon, like a symbol. A week after that, what Yanho had been waiting for half a year finally happened. The Crown Inquisition. They arrived in the morning. Without warning. 3 carriages at the pillar, 12 inquisitors in black uniforms with silver trim, led by a woman, tall. Her back was perfectly straight, eyes that made professors drop their cups. Seo Jimin, Chief Inquisitor of the Western District, 26 years old, the youngest in the history of the Inquisition. Yanho learned about her from Choe Ari. The Inquisition had been waiting 800 years for a pretext to raid the academy. They knew something was being hidden. They didn't know exactly what. Every 10 years they sent an inspection. Each time, the administration fought it off. Privileges, connections, bribes, pressure. The Inquisition retreated. But it didn't leave. It waited. And now, someone ratted them out. Someone told them about the warmth that suddenly spread throughout the academy, about the janitor who fixes pipes and breaks spells, about the black mana in the fountains, about the dead rats. Someone gave the Inquisition a reason. Yanho suspected that this someone was sitting in the rector's chair. Yoon Hyun-soo, the guardian, the man who had been sitting on the lid for 30 years, and who decided it was better to let the Inquisition in than to allow the plumber to pull out one more nail. The calculation was simple. The Inquisition would come. They would find Yanho, arrest him, take him away. The system would remain. The cover would remain. The nails are in place. Yanho didn't go into hiding. Instead, he did something no one expected of him. He met the Inquisition at the entrance to the basements. In person. Wearing a gray robe, carrying a toolbox, and he offered them a tour. So Jimin looked down on him, literally. She was a head taller, in a black uniform, with a silver badge on her chest. Her face was inscrutable. Her eyes were like 2 blades. She asked who he was. Yanho replied, "Emergency Services Engineer. I maintain the plumbing and heating systems." She asked since when maintenance workers had been giving tours to the Inquisition. Yanho replied that it had been since the Inquisition started taking an interest in the water supply system. A pause. Something flashed in her eyes. Not anger, curiosity. She agreed. Yanho led them through the basements, the first level, the second, third. He showed them the pipes, the joints, the valves. He explained. Calmly, professionally, like an engineer to a client. Here's the water supply system. Here's the heating circuit. Here's the sewer system. Here are the problems, leaks, clogs, damage, 200 years without maintenance. He showed them a report, not on paper, verbal. 63 problems at the start of the project, 32 remained. Of those, 11 required access to the lower levels. Access was blocked by the university administration. He didn't say why, didn't say what was down there. He simply pointed to the locked doors and sealed passageways and said they wouldn't let him work. The inquisitors took notes. So Jimin remained silent. She watched. She listened. 3 hours later, the tour ended. Yanho led them to the kitchen in the service wing. Soru was already waiting. The table was set. Porridge, bread, tea, hot soup. 12 inquisitors in black uniforms sat at the servants' table and ate the porridge that healed. In silence. So Jimin sat at the end of the table, a spoon in her hand, soup in a bowl. She ate slowly. Yanho watched her face change. The harsh lines softened. Her shoulders dropped. Her back, which had been like a steel rod, relaxed slightly. She finished eating. She set down her bowl. She looked at Yanho. She asked quietly when was the last time she'd eaten without being in a hurry. Then she answered her own question. She couldn't remember. Yanho silently poured her a second bowl. She took it, and he saw it. For a single second, a glint in her eyes. Not blades. Tears. For a single second. Then she blinked and became the inquisitor again. But that second had happened. The Inquisitor left that evening, with a thick folder of violations from the rector's office. Standing on the threshold with Jimin, she turned around. She looked at Yeonho. She said she'd be back. Yeonho nodded. He knew she'd be back, not as an inquisitor, but as a person who, for the first time in her life, had been fed hot soup just because, a year at the academy. Yeonho was sitting in the forbidden section across from Choi Airi. A map lay on the table between them. A real one, on paper. Choi Airi had been drawing it for 8 years, bit by bit. From banned books, from scrolls the administration believed had been destroyed. The map revealed what no one knew, the complete diagram of the Fourth Circuit, all 8 nodes, all 8 seals, and what lay between them, a body, enormous, coiled in a ring beneath the academy, its head beneath the central tower, its tail beneath the east wing, 4 paws extending toward the 4 pillars, the guardian spirit of the waterways. That was its name before it was a demon. An ancient being who, thousands of years before the academy, had guarded the continent's underground rivers, guided the currents, cleared the riverbeds, watched over the water. Did what Yeonho does, only on a global scale. The academy's founders came to him for help. They asked for water for their school. He gave it to them, generously. They asked for mana. He gave it to them. They asked for more and more and more. And then they decided it was easier to take than to ask. They encased him in stone. They drove 8 seals into his body. They declared him a demon. And they built the academy right on top of him. Like a parasite on its host. 800 years. Yeonho looked at the map. Choi Airi sat across from him. The runes on her wrists pulsed quietly, the oath held, but the map spoke for her. Every line, every knot, every mark made over 8 years of solitude. Yeonho asked who had been secretly tending to the node in the basement of the east wing, the one with the bolts tightened just right. Choi Airi raised her hands. She showed her slender, gloved fingers. It was her. For 8 years, once a month, she would go down at night. She would check the one node she could reach. She would tighten the bolts, change the gasket, lubricate the valve. It was the only thing she could do for the creature suffering beneath her feet, a librarian who secretly worked as a plumber, because there was no one else. Yeonho looked at her pale face, at her slender arms, at the runic shackles on her wrists. 8 years, alone. With a secret that weighed on her like a 2-meter-tall stone, and yet she still went down, every month, into the darkness, to the pipes, to the one everyone called a demon, because she knew the truth. He told her she'd soon go down, to him, to the creature. Choi Airi closed her eyes. The runes flared, pain, but she nodded. She knew it was necessary. Yeonho spent the next 2 months preparing. He worked openly. He repaired everything he could on the accessible levels. 5 nodes out of 8. 3 seals still unliberated. 5 liberated. Water will, fire will. The void that came when he cleared the drain in the artifactor's wing. The neutralization of others' spells. Once he accidentally neutralized an instructor's combat spell in the middle of a training duel. He pretended it was a draft. No one believed him, but no one could prove otherwise. Resonance came when he cleared the main drain in the east wing, amplifying others' spells. He quietly gave Yuna a boost. He gave a boost to the female students who were being bullied in the combat department. Rumors spread through the dorms. Go see the plumber. He's doing something, and it's working. Earth came from the 5th node, the sensation of stone. In every wall, every floor slab, every foundation, 5 out of 8. The network was growing. Yeonho held it like a spiderweb. Each node is a tower, a small, invisible tower with its own function. Water, fire, void, resonance, earth. For the first time in 200 years, the academy stopped leaking. It stopped humming. It stopped killing rats. The professors noticed. Something was wrong. Something had changed, but they couldn't figure out exactly what, because everything had changed, slowly, imperceptibly, like the water temperature rising 1 degree at a time. One evening, So Jimin returned, not with a squad, alone in plain clothes, without her silver badge. She found Yan Ho in the basement. She said she'd been taken off the case. Her superiors had come under pressure from the university administration. The file on the violations had been shelved. The investigation was closed. Officially, she'd come unofficially, because she couldn't forget the soup, and she couldn't forget the basements, and she couldn't forget the face of the plumber who looked her in the eyes without fear. Yan Ho poured her some soup. Sora had prepared it. They sat in the tiny room, just the two of them. So Jimin ate slowly. Then she set down her bowl. She said she knew about the creature down below, not from him. From the Inquisition's archives. 800 years ago, the Inquisition was against imprisonment. They were reassigned to another task. The documents were classified, but copies remained. She found them, she read them, and she came, because for the first time in 800 years, someone was doing what the Inquisition had failed to do, not from above, not by force, from below, with a key. She said she would cover for him, on behalf of the crown, that she had connections, that being sidelined didn't mean powerlessness. Yan Ho looked at her, tall, beautiful, with eyes that cut like knives, and that softened when she ate soup. He nodded. He accepted it. She left with Jimin at dawn. She turned around at the threshold. She said that next time she'd bring something from the archives, something that would help. Yan Ho stood in the doorway and watched her leave. Her back was straight, her stride was confident, but for a second, just for a second, she turned around again and smiled, for the first time ever. Yan Ho returned to his tiny room. He sat down. All around him was a network, 5 towers, 5 nodes, 5 seals, 3 left, 3 nails that need to be pulled out. The rector is waiting with the order to kill. The Inquisition has been sidelined, but so Jimin is on his side. Yuna is in the combat department. Emily is in the workshop. Soru is in the kitchen. Haeyun is in the laundry room. Chue Ari is in the secret library. Master Cho is at the doors, the network. Not a pipe network, a human one. People standing side by side, each in their place, each doing what they know how to do. Like nodes in a system, like pipes in a wall, the network holds. For now. A year and a half, a rupture in the main collector. Yan Ho had been expecting this. He knew it would happen sooner or later. The system was old. The 5 released seals altered the pressure. The mana flows were reorganized. The old pipes couldn't withstand the new load. The rupture occurred at night, in the central tower. The main riser burst at the junction of the 2nd and 3rd levels. Water and mana gushed into the corridors. Alarm, bells, screams. Students ran out of their rooms in their nightclothes. Professors in robes over their nightgowns. Chaos. Yan Ho got dressed in 30 seconds. He grabbed the box. He ran, not up toward the rupture, down to the main valve. Shut off the flow. The first rule of an emergency responder. Stop the flow first. Then fix it. He shut off the flow in 4 minutes. The water stopped. The mana stopped. The academy fell silent. Silence after chaos. Then he went up to the site of the rupture, the 2nd-level corridor of the central tower, knee-deep in water. The riser had burst at the seam, an old seam, 800 years old. The crack ran from floor to ceiling. Yan Ho looked and counted. A patch won't help. The section needs to be replaced. 1 meter of pipe, bronze. He doesn't have a 1-meter bronze pipe. No welding equipment, nothing, except for a tuning fork and a box. And then Yuna stood beside him, with the tuning fork. In her new uniform, barefoot, knee-deep in water. And Emily, with a set of artifactor tools, in a nightgown with an apron pulled over it. And Minso Ru, with clean rags and hot tea in a thermos. And Haeyun, with a bucket and a mop, silently, without questions, each in her place. Yan Ho looked at them, then at the pipe, then at them again. He told Emily he needed a piece of white material, bone, from the 4th circuit. Emily nodded. She left. She returned 20 minutes later with a scrap of white pipe from the workshop, the very one that had been sticking out of the wall. She'd sawed it off. Neatly. Cleanly. Yan Ho took it, a white pipe instead of a bronze one, the bone of a living creature instead of dead metal. He slammed the scrap into the riser. Emily held the joint while he tightened it. Yuna handed him tools. Hayun scooped out the water. Soru stood in the doorway and kept onlookers out. They worked for an hour. The connection was unconventional. Bronze to bone, different materials, different temperatures, different vibrations, but with the right gasket and the right torque, it held. Yon-ho turned on the supply. Water flowed, mana flowed, the joint held, dry, clean. A white stub in the bronze riser glowed with a warm, soft light, living bone in dead metal, like a heart in a mechanism, and from that junction a wave rippled through the entire central tower, warm, calm, like an exhalation, as if the creature below had breathed a freer sigh. The students in the hallways froze. They sensed it. They didn't understand what it was, but they sensed it. In the morning, the president arrived, in person. He came down to the hallway. He saw the white fragment in the bronze pipe. He turned pale. Then he flushed. Then he turned gray. He knew what kind of material it was, knew where it came from, knew what it meant. He looked at Yeon-ho. Yeon-ho was standing against the wall, dirty, wet, a box at his feet, 5 women nearby, Soru with a thermos, Hayun with a mop, Yuna with a tuning fork, Emily with a screwdriver, and Chue Eri. She was the last to arrive. She stood off to the side, wearing gloves, silent, but standing there, with them. The dean looked at them, at all of them, 7 people, a plumber in a gray smock, a laundress, a cook, an expelled student in a new uniform, a foreign woman in a nightgown, a librarian in gloves, a heavy-set old man with a bunch of keys, 7 against 800 years of lies. The dean turned and walked away, silently, and Yeon-ho realized that the next move would be the last, either his or the dean's. He didn't wait any longer. That very day, he announced to his people, all 7 of them, that he was going down, to the creature, to the lowest level. Soru said she'd prepare some food for him for the journey. Hayun said she'd wash a clean robe for him. Yuna said she'd go with him. Emily said she would too. Choi Ari said she'd show him the way. Master Cho said he'd stand at the entrance and let no one through. Yun-ho shook his head. He said he'd go alone. Yuna started to argue. He stopped her. He said that down there was a creature that had been waiting for 800 years, not for an army. It had been waiting for one person, someone who understands pipes. One came. One must go down. Yuna fell silent. She clutched the tuning fork. She gritted her teeth, but she nodded. That night, Yeon-ho went down, past the first level, past the second, past the third, past the dean's ban, deeper, through the bricked-up wall that Cho Ari had shown him on the map, through the passage she had opened with her slender hands. She had been preparing that passage for 8 years, pebble by pebble, brick by brick. Every month she removed 1 stone, and put it back, so no one would notice. Today she removed the last one. The passage opened. Darkness. Yeon-ho lit the tuning fork. Blue light. A staircase leading down. Steps made of white material, of bone. He descended and felt the warmth under his feet, living warmth, like a mother's hand on the forehead of a sick child. The staircase ended, a hall. Huge. The ceiling was lost in the darkness, and in the center of the hall, Yeon-ho stopped. Before him lay the guardian spirit of the waterways. Huge, coiled into a ring, a body like a river, scales like water. Eyes were closed, 8 chains of stone and metal dug into its body. The 3 remaining seals, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the final nails. Yeon-ho sat down at the edge of the hall. He took off his imaginary helmet. He'd never worn a helmet in this world, but the gesture remained, a habit, and he began to speak, softly, calmly, just as one might talk to a colleague during a smoke break. He said his name was Park Yeon-ho. He said he was an engineer, a plumber. He said he had 300 children up above, 6 women who were dear to him, and 1 stubborn old man in a robe. He said he hadn't come to fight, not to liberate, not to destroy. He'd come to talk, like an engineer. Silence, a long silence, a resonant one. Then the creature opened one eye, golden, enormous, like a lake, and in that eye, Yan Ho saw 800 years of pain, of loneliness, of waiting, and of hope. A small, quiet hope that had not died even after 8 centuries. The creature was silent. So was Yan Ho. They looked at each other, a golden eye the size of a well, and 2 human eyes, weary from lack of sleep. Then Yan Ho took a tuning fork out of the box. He tapped it on the floor. The tuning fork hummed, and the creature responded. Not with a voice, with a vibration. Its entire body, every vein in the academy's walls, every white pipe, everything hummed in response. A single note, pure, deep, ancient. Yan Ho listened. He tuned in, just as he tuned the tuning fork to the runes. Only the scale was different. Not a rune. A being, alive, enormous, suffering. The hum subsided. The being closed its eyes, opened them again, and images appeared in Yan Ho's mind. Not words, pictures, a river, underground, endless. It flowed beneath the entire continent. Pure, bright, alive, the keeper lay at its source, the heart of the river. He didn't create the water. He guided it, purified it, watched over it, just like Yan Ho, only for thousands of years instead of 8. Then people came. They asked. He gave. They asked for more. He gave. Then they stopped asking. They started taking. Chains, stone, nails, pain, 800 years. The visions ended. Yan Ho sat on the floor. His face was wet. He wiped it with his sleeve. He looked at the 3 remaining chains, the 6th seal on his neck, the 7th on his chest, the 8th on his tail. 3 nails. He could remove them. Right now. He had the tools. He had the knowledge. He had the water will, which gave him power over every drop of mana in the academy. 5 seals freed, 5 towers of his network. Enough power to remove the remaining 3. He didn't. Because the rector was right, partially. If he removed all the seals at once, the creature would awaken completely, and the academy, which stood upon its body, would lose its foundation. 300 students in a floating complex without support. A fall. Death. Yan Ho hadn't come to destroy, he'd come to repair. He spoke up. He addressed the creature as if it were a client, calmly, professionally. He said he saw the problem. The system was built incorrectly, parasitically. The academy takes everything and gives nothing in return. This needs to be changed, but it can't be changed all at once. You can't rip off the lid if there's pressure beneath it. First, the pressure needs to be equalized, then open it. The engineering way. He proposed a plan, not liberation, not confinement, restructuring. The 3 remaining seals shouldn't be removed, but redesigned, from nails to hinges, from locks to joints, from chains to pipes, real pipes, through which mana will flow, not from the creature to the academy, but between them, in both directions, symbiosis instead of parasitism. The academy receives water and mana. The creature gains freedom of movement. Not complete, not immediately, but gradually, step by step, pipe by pipe. The creature listened. The golden eye did not blink. Then an image, one, simple. Yan Ho saw a hand, a human one, reached out toward him, an open palm, a handshake. It's a deal. Yan Ho reached out into the darkness. His fingers touched scales, warm, wet, alive, like a pressurized pipe, a pulse, powerful, steady. He felt his entire body become part of the system for a single second. Water, fire, earth, stone, mana, everything. Every atom of the academy, every drop of the underground river, every breath of the 300 students upstairs. It all coursed through him like an electric current, and then it was gone. He pulled his hand back. He stood there, breathing, heavily, deeply. The creature closed its eye, but on its face, on that enormous face, the size a house, something had changed. Yan Ho could have sworn he saw the semblance of a smile. He'd been working for 3 days straight, without sleep, without food. Soru had been passing up flatbreads through Choeari. Master Cho stood at the entrance upstairs. He wouldn't let anyone in. Yuna stood next to him, with a tuning fork, with new magic, ready. Emily kept watch in the workshop. She kept an eye on the pipes. If anything went wrong, she'd be the first to see it. Ha-Yun was in the laundry room, doing laundry, calmly. The water obeyed her hands. She wasn't afraid anymore. She arrived with Ji-min on the second day, without warning, in full uniform, with a squad. Don't arrest them, cover them. She stood at the academy gates and told the rector that this was an inspection, that the Inquisition had the right, that any attempt to go down into the basements during the inspection would be considered an act of defiance against the crown. The rector stood there, pale as a sheet. He understood. The plumber was downstairs, with the creature, alone. And everything the rector had built over 30 years was crumbling, not because someone was stronger, but because someone was more right. Yan-Ho reworked the sixth seal within the first day. He removed the chain from the creature's neck. In its place, he installed a connector, a bronze adapter, a gasket, a valve, a pipe running from the creature's neck to the academy's main riser. A two-way flow. Mana flows upward into the academy and returns downward. A cycle, not a drain, not parasitism. An exchange. The seventh seal, the chest, the most complicated part. This was the main junction, the heart of the system. The chain was embedded directly into the sternum. Yan-Ho worked carefully, bolt by bolt, nut by nut. The creature lay motionless, enduring it. It had waited 800 years. It could wait a few more hours. Yan-Ho removed the chain. Beneath it was a wound, deep, ancient. Mana oozed from it like blood. He couldn't heal the wound. He wasn't a healer, but he could make sure the mana didn't go to waste. He placed a check valve right over the wound, like a patch on a punctured pipe. The mana stopped flowing out and began flowing back into the body. The creature shuddered, its entire body. The academy above swayed. Students stumbled. Professors clung to the walls. The pillars hummed. Yan-Ho clung to the white pipe, to the vein. He could feel its pulse. Fast, strong. The creature was breathing deeper than it had in 800 years. The eighth seal, the tail, the last one. Yan-Ho reached it on the third day. His hands trembled with exhaustion. His eyes were heavy, but he didn't stop. A repairman doesn't stop until the job is done. The last chain was thinner than the rest. Simpler. It was as if whoever had installed it 8 centuries ago had been in a hurry. He'd done the first 7 thoroughly, but he'd cut corners on the last one. Yan-Ho smiled. It felt familiar. Every project has some sloppy work in the final stage. He removed the chain, made the connection, the last valve, the last gasket, the last bolt. He tightened them crosswise, evenly. He stood up, wiped his hands on his robe, and then, light, from every wire, from every white pipe, from every joint, steady, calm, warm, like the morning sun. It rose up the walls, up the pillars, up the risers, through every faucet, every fountain, every drain. The academy glowed from within. Upstairs, Ha-Yun stood by the laundry room. The water from the faucet glowed golden. She held out her palms, warm, pure, alive. She didn't pull her hands away. For the first time in her life, she held her palms under the water and wasn't afraid, and she laughed, quietly, brightly, like a child. Yuna stood at the entrance to the basement. The tuning fork in her hand sang a single pure note, that very one, the ancient one. Her eyes burned with gold. Resonant magic answered the call of the creature awakening below. Soru stood in the kitchen. The pot of water on the stove glowed. The water boiled on its own. Without a flame, porridge was cooking in the golden light, and it gave off a scent that made people cry, not from grief, from happiness. Emily stood in the workshop. A white pipe in the wall pulsed, warm, alive. She placed her hand on it and laughed, loudly, openly. As always, Chui Ari stood in the forbidden section. The runes on her wrists were fading. One by one, the oath was crumbling, not because someone had removed them, because there was nothing left to keep. The secret was over. She took off her gloves. She looked at her hands. Clean. Free. For the first time in 8 years. Master Cho stood by the door to the basement, Old, heavy-set, with keys on his belt, the walls around him glowed gold. He pressed his palm against the stone, warmth, real warmth, and he smiled, broadly, like a little boy. Above ground, the combat faculty froze. 100 of the continent's finest mages stood and watched. From every spout, every fountain, from every gutter of the academy, light rose, steady, calm, golden, not aggressive, not frightening, warm, like a hand stroking one's head. Rector Yoon Hyun Soo stood by the window of his office. He gazed at the light. His face was pale. His hands were trembling. 30 years under the lid, and now the lid had been removed, not torn off, removed, carefully, professionally, with the gasket replaced, and the world hadn't collapsed. The academy hadn't fallen. The students were alive. The professors were alive. The staff were alive. Everyone was alive, and light streamed from every pipe. He sank into a chair, covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. Yeon-ho climbed the stairs, step by step. His legs felt like cast iron. 3 days without sleep. His hands were buzzing. His body was buzzing. Everything was buzzing. But it was the right kind of buzz. A working buzz, like a new system after startup. Breaking in, adjusting, settling into a rhythm. He emerged from the basement into the hallway of the service wing, covered in dirt, wet. His eyes red from lack of sleep. His robe was soaked through. Foreman Cho was the first to see him. The old man stepped toward him. He hugged him, tightly, silently. It smelled of sweat and old metal. Yeon-ho stood in his arms, breathing. Then Master Cho let him go, stepped back, looked at him. His eyes were wet. His mustache bristled. Yeon-ho wiped his hands on his work coat, looked at Master Cho, spoke in a voice hoarse from exhaustion. "It's all you, Uncle Cho. I passed the test. Now let's have dinner." The following weeks were difficult. The academy didn't fall apart, but it was changing. The creature down below hadn't gone away. It had awakened. For the first time in 800 years, it was breathing freely. Not completely. The connections that Yeon-ho had installed in place of the chains held it in place. But gently, not like a prison, like a home. It could move. A little. Wag its tail, turn its head. And because of its movements, the academy came alive, truly alive. The water flowed clear and warm. The mana flowed steadily. The heating worked perfectly. Even the light in the crystals grew brighter. The students got used to it within a week. Young people adapt quickly. The professors in half that time. The rector couldn't get used to it. He came to see Yeon-ho a month after the descent, alone, without guards, in a simple robe. He stood in the doorway of the small room and looked, old, tired, without his cello-like voice, just ordinary. He said he'd been wrong, not entirely, but on the main point. They didn't have to keep the lid on. It needed to be fixed. Yeon-ho offered him tea. The rector sat down. He drank. He was silent. Then he asked what would happen now. Yeon-ho replied, now he needed a position, an official one, with a budget, with a team, with access to all levels. Chief Overseer. The rector asked what a chief overseer does. Yeon-ho replied, he fixes things. Everything. The rector finished his tea. He nodded. He stood up. At the doorway, he turned around. He said quietly that after 30 years at the top, he'd forgotten what it was like to feel warmth. Thank you. Yeon-ho nodded. The rector left. A week later, a decree was issued. The position of chief overseer was established, for the first time in the academy's history, reporting directly to the council. Not to the rector, to the council, with a budget, with a team, with access rights to all levels, including the Fourth Circuit. Yeon-ho received a new robe, not gray, white, with a blue stripe down the sleeve, the color of water. He looked at it, then he put on his old gray one. He hung the white one on a nail. For official occasions, it's more comfortable to work in the old one. Spring had come to the academy, warm, golden. Yeon-ho sat on the roof. His legs dangled over the abyss. No clouds below. Greenery, spring. Ha-yoon was beside him with a mug of tea. She held it out to him. He took it, drank, remained silent. She remained silent. Silence. The right kind of silence. Productive. Then he said softly, "You know, in my world there was a pipe, in the basement. It needed to be replaced last quarter." Hayun turned toward him. The wind ruffled her hair. Her hands weren't red anymore. Soft. Healed. She asked quietly, "What kind of pipe?" Yeonho looked down, at the world that had become his home, at the academy, which stood not on lies but on the living breath of a being that no longer suffered, at the pipes that sang, at the water that flowed, at the people who ate their fill and slept in warmth. He took a sip of tea. Warm. Soru's porridge for breakfast, Emily's thermos, Hyun's flatbreads, Yuna's tuning fork hums quietly 1 floor below. Master Cho is repairing a shelf in the storage room. For the first time in 8 years, Choe Ari is sitting in the library without gloves, reading a book that isn't banned. So Jimin sent a letter, a short one. "I'll be there on Thursday. I'll bring the valve. That very one. The 4th one, for the heat exchanger." Yeonho smiled. He finished his tea, set down the mug, told Hayun that he still hadn't replaced the gasket in his world. She looked at him, smiled, not just the corners of her mouth, her whole face. She said quietly that there were plenty of gaskets here, enough for a lifetime. Yeonho nodded. He stood up. He slung the box over his shoulder. That very one. The wooden one, with a bronze tuning fork and a curved serrated rod, heavy, familiar. He headed downstairs, toward the pipes, because pipes don't wait, because the system needs maintenance, because water flows down, always down, and if you don't get in its way, it'll take care of everything on its own. Just don't get in the way, and fix whatever's around it.